Everyone over here, actually. Yeah. You get to sweat from it.
Okay, I'm going to get us started. I'm sorry, I know we're starting a little bit later.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry, it was fun.
I was walking out the door and people accosted me as I left.
No worries, no worries. Well, welcome everyone to the Board Roles and Responsibilities Training. My name is Janet Avila Medina. I am a board development specialist, just a fancy name for a board trainer. I go out all over Oregon and help boards like yourself understand the roles and responsibilities. That's just one of our trainings. We cover a lot of different topics, and you'll hear more about that later today. And but yeah, welcome. And we're gonna get started because there's a lot of ground to cover. But this work session is gonna be very interactive. I'll be talking and giving best practice and asking questions, and especially reflection questions. But it's gonna be a lot of all of you all also participating. So I encourage as much as possible, of course, as much as you feel comfortable, to engage, participate in the discussion that we're gonna have. And we even have some scenarios planned for you all. Usually I'm told they're fun, so you will be the judge of that. But to get started, before we jump into all the content here, what's one thing, just if I can hear from each of you, one thing or area you're hoping to learn today? So at the end of tonight's session, what do you hope to take away home with you? And we'll just start, we'll start over here and we'll go around the table.
I don't know if there's one thing or area I hope to learn today. I just know that when I joined the board, it was still like during the masking era of COVID, and I haven't been on the board long enough to even have like a real formal training before. So I'm just happy to participate in a training. So I don't know what to expect out of it. I'm just happy to do it.
That's great. Yeah, first training. Good for me to know.
I did some online stuff.
The webinars.
Yeah, webinars, and I did a pretty extensive like 3-day thing with the superintendent at that time. So like they didn't leave me hanging, but
Gotcha.
I wasn't able to do this type of situation or go to a conference or anything.
Okay, awesome.
How long have you been on the board?
What was that, 2022?
Since 2022? Okay.
So only 2 years, 2.5 years. It was January.
Awesome.
I have been through a similar training, an OSBA training, but it was a long time ago, and I always find like it's like rereading a book where I'm like, oh wait, I thought what I got that first time, you know. So like I'm just I know that I'll find helpful things out of this and be reminded of things that I learned but forgot. So I don't know. Again, can't pinpoint specifically what but I am very happy to be here and learning and relearning whatever I can. Awesome. Love it. And how long have you been on the board? Oh, I've been, don't know.
You lost track.
I seriously, I lose track and I look at it and I'm like, wait, was it, I don't know, 15 years? No, not that long. Maybe 10.
Okay.
I'll look.
A seasoned board member, I like to say.
I don't know. That makes
That's
sense.
the one. That's the
Yeah,
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Welcome.
This is my first board training officially with like for you all. So I'm excited to see like what I guess 2 things, just like growing the connection with SBA and knowing the resources, and then making sure we're doing things right. See
Yes.
what I want to take away.
Absolutely. That's great. Love that.
And Sue's been on,
2 years. This is just finished today.
Oh, congratulations. That's awesome.
yeah, and I've been on the board somewhere between 35 and 40 years.
Wow.
So I want to be updated. You know, I feel like I have some pretty serious game, but I also know that things change and I might be in the past sometimes.
Yeah, I love that. You're actually probably the longest board member I've had. Because like I was going to say, I've done a training and one board member was there for 30 years. But if you're 35, 40, you said?
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm ancient.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
She started when I was 2.
Good to know. No, good to know, because there's board member of the year, y'all, at OSBA.
Yeah.
So you can nominate. I think you might have just missed nominations, but keep that in mind for next year.
Or maybe in like 5 more years.
You get recognized at the annual convention. It's actually really great. You'll get recognized at the annual convention. You get a plaque. Yeah, like a little award. Yeah. Keep it in mind.
Put you on that.
Yeah. When does that?
I'll send it to you.
Take number 1 today.
There you go.
I wanna,
Yeah, and honestly, that's one of the biggest things, right? And that's my job, is to raise awareness, because a lot of times it's like, oh, I didn't know that this existed. And we do a lot of, like, our marketing team does a lot, but it's like, it's hard when your emails get flooded, you're busy, you have jobs. I totally get it. So
my email has like flagged the OSBA email that is like
spam.
I have to search for them.
like it goes to
Interesting. Yeah, we're working. Well, I know our communications team is working on how to improve some of that. Abby, is it Abby?
Yeah. Yep. I don't really know what I'm hoping to learn today. I'm just gonna sit here and listen. Abby's our newest board, yeah.
Newest board member. All right.
And I think, since everyone's asking how long, I think it was 2020. So it was like everything, it was totally online, like everything. So my original answer when we started was definitely, I don't know what I want to learn. So I'm going to stick with that. Like whatever you have to give us, I think is great. So
Awesome.
it's because I haven't done any since I've been here. So
Okay. And that might change, right? After tonight, hopefully, or today. I keep saying tonight. I'm sorry. I always do board training sometimes in the evening, mostly in the evening, but I love doing them in the day also. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you all. Oh, sure. Do you want to introduce yourself? You're an important team member too.
Damn straight.
So can you introduce yourself? Let me know how long you've been at Mapleton and what are you looking forward
My
to?
name is Jared.
Hi,
I've been here for 6 years. And what I want to get out of today, I'll make it back home safely.
Me too. Not that long, 2.5 hours. Okay, well, we're gonna get started. So as I present, like I mentioned, it's a very interactive session. I'll do some presentation, some presenting, and then I'll ask you all to chime in as well. But feel free to write down questions. At the end, we will have time. So if I don't address them throughout the presentation, hold me accountable and ask them at the end. I will hold at least 10 to 15 minutes at the end. Comments, anything that you also, what I would say, are finding oh, I want to know more about this. Write it down, and we'll talk about it at the end. All right, so I mentioned that I'm going to make you work today. So first thing, I would love to reflect for a minute here, and I'd love to hear from one or two of you. Why does the board matter? I'll give you a minute.
I think the thing I come up with is that it really is an example of democracy. We don't get paid, we represent the community. It's not really a glamour position. So, we do things because we care. About the biggest reason would be.
Just jotting things down here. Democracy, volunteer position, absolutely. You care about students, right? Anybody else want to add anything to add to what
I think
Michelle?
whenever you have more than just a couple people, it helps bring different thoughts or viewpoints. At point, sometimes those are aha moments or just different perspectives. Maybe even the questions we ask of admin at the school, just makes for more thorough thoughts. So.
Absolutely. And we'll talk about that, right? You can each have your individuals. You have your own lived experiences, perspectives, opinions, and that's great. But when you come together, I want to make sure you hear from all of you, right? All your voices. And then the process, though, you have to acknowledge that the process is that decisions are made as a quorum. And you can agree to disagree. You don't have to, agree. Obviously, if you voted against that you don't agree with it. But you have to acknowledge that's the process and essentially know that that's the vote, the authority, the affirmative action vote. And so you have to accept and acknowledge that that's how it's going to go. And we'll talk more about that, about speaking with one voice. And that can be hard. But you are absolutely right. That's why it's important during your board meetings and deliberations that you hear each other and stay informed. We're going to talk a lot about that as well. How do you as a board stay informed so that when you are making decisions on policies, you feel like you have the information you've heard from different perspectives to then make a decision. Great. All right. So all of you mentioned a lot of great things, right? I jotted it down there just so you can visually see it. Democracy, volunteer positions, absolutely. I tell boards, sometimes you wear many different hats, right? And that's hard. I totally acknowledge that. Yes, did you have something?
No.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, feel free to call me out if you need to raise your hand if you have something to add. But that can be really hard. And so it's important, and we're going to talk about that. Individual board authority and limits versus the board authority and limits. And I have some policies that I will share later. We'll walk through them. I have a little packet that I created that I like to call most commonly used policies. And I didn't put them all in there, but we will talk about them. But essentially, your work as a board matters. And I'm not just saying this, but the research, it's rooted in the research. I've also seen it when boards collaborate, how you are with your individual perspectives and thoughts, like you mentioned, your board work. Oh, what happened? Oh, there it is. Your board work, your culture. And what I mean by that is just how you deliberate, how you make decisions, how you speak to each other, how you communicate with Sue. If you have a positive board culture, you understand your roles and responsibilities, which is what this training is for, then you're going to have a positive culture that's going to trickle into the organizational culture or the district culture. Which then ultimately goes into the classroom instructions, because if the superintendent feels supported, then that's going to trickle into the staff, ultimately impact your students and student achievement. So it's really this causal chain. It's this, I like to say, domino effect, and it starts with you as individual board members. And so again, I'm going to talk about a couple of these approaches that's rooted in the research, and I'm going to be mentioning them throughout. And so hopefully, I know I did my job, because if you're able to then apply it later on during your board work, then I know that I did my job here today. So collaborative governance. So this is a definition that my team, board development, created based on research. And essentially, I'll leave this up here for you to read. And I'm also happy to send these slides after the session. But essentially, what this is saying is that without trust and respect, so if you don't trust each other, you don't understand the roles and responsibilities, how even decisions are made, you will not have effective partnerships. And that's very important. You have to I tell boards, you have 3 partnerships. You have to partner with the board, the superintendent, and with the community. But if you don't have that trust and respect, you can't even do work. You can't even collaborate. And your work is very collaborative. And I'm going to be showing you how that shows up and how your work is collaborative. And also, you have to set high expectations, not only for the district and for the superintendent, which you hire, but also for your students and for yourself as a board too. And I'm going to show you again, what does that look like? Another approach that we're going to be talking about is that balanced governance. And this is rooted in the research too. We actually partnered with this researcher. And if you've been to our events, we brought in last year to our annual convention, Dr. Tom Alsbury. And basically what we don't want to see happening and what he says in this balanced governance approach is that boards shouldn't be on either side of this continuum. You don't want to be a disengaged rubber stamp, or you essentially call them nodding heads at board meetings. You're just nodding heads, agreeing to whatever is brought to you. But you also don't want to be on the other side where you're overreaching, or what we like to call micromanaging, getting into the weeds of the day-to-day operations of the superintendent. And you don't want to do that. That's why you hire the superintendent to do that work. But what you do need to be is informed and in your oversight, overarching role of governance. So making sure that, and again, it's based on trust. That's why I showed that previous slide. You need to trust, right? You hire the superintendent, that the superintendent is going to get you the information you need to then be able to be informed when you are adopting and looking at policies, for example. And we'll talk more about these approaches and put them into practice later tonight. Today, oh my gosh.
Night works.
It feels like it, right? It's a long day. It feels like it, right? So again, I love what you said, Michelle, about like staying updated and informed. We at OSBA and my team are constantly looking at the latest research and practices. And we're constantly also improving, because if you took this training before, it used to be very presentational, and now it's more interactive, and you'll see that here in a moment. So we're constantly also valuing feedback. But really, I just want to show you kind of some of the research that we've used. How many of you have heard of the Lighthouse Study? Well, the Lighthouse Study is one that typically a lot of boards, because it used to be what we used to do our trainings based off, which basically that Lighthouse Study, which is great, and we still apply it at times, that board actions for behaviors has a correlation with impacting student achievement. But since then, there's been more researchers, and so we've been now applying a lot of Dr. Tom Alsbury, who's what I showed you, the balanced governance approach. And we're going to be walking through Tom Alsbury's Improving School Board Effectiveness Balanced Governance Standards. So essentially, I'm going to walk you through all of these and show you what does that look like. We're going to have time to reflect, ask questions throughout these standards. But basically, if boards understand these standards and they know how to apply them, they're an effective functioning board. They will impact students. And so I just want to show you kind of what we're going to be doing tonight. And you see I highlighted some, and the reason I highlighted, there's a lot of overlap, and you'll see throughout today's presentation how things are going to start to connect the dots with these standards. But I highlighted these in particular because we're doing a roles and responsibilities training, and all these standards matter, but really, when it comes to roles and responsibilities, it's around board conduct, superintendent relationship, and then culture and climate. Because if you don't have that, then you won't be able to even have a relationship with the superintendent. That's why I highlighted this. Everything's intentional. All right, so we're going to dive into standard 1, which is vision directed planning. And what does that mean? So when you see this, all students can learn and succeed. What comes to mind? What is this?
A vision statement.
Did you say?
Vision statement?
A vision statement, Anyone else?
Like foundational belief in operation of our district.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's a belief, right? And if you believe that all students can learn and succeed, that's what I was talking about, setting high expectations, right? It's not saying blaming external factors, although, I'm not going to not acknowledge that funding is super important, but what I'm talking about is like, oh, those students or these students. It's all your students. Each and every single student here at Mapleton School District matters. And if you believe that as a board, then you'll be able to create that impact, because that's where your work is going to get, is coming from. All your work, when you're looking at policies, if you believe this, make sure you bring it back to that. And I know you all care for students. I'm just trying to put it into perspective of, making sure you're thinking of socioeconomic factors, et cetera, all your students, the programs, and we'll talk more about how you can do that as a board and ask the questions without getting into the weeds, especially when it comes to looking at data, which we'll talk about later. But yes. And yes, it can also be a vision statement. So when it comes to vision-directed planning, this is your board mission and vision that you have in the website. I just pulled it directly from your website, which is fantastic, right? Provide supportive, safe learning environment for where all students, I love that you already called it out, all students are encouraged and empowered to reach their education and personal potential. That's beautiful. That's a really beautiful vision statement, mission statement, and then your vision. What I didn't see though is so this is great, because this is like the board vision and goals, and I'm curious to see how this was created from you all or hear how this was created. But I didn't see the district goals. So usually, and this is my job, and this is okay, I see it, it just varies from district to district. But this is great because the board has created their own mission and vision, but that's on their board work. This is what they believe, right? But I don't see the district goals. And so when it comes to the role of the board, you set the strategic direction. And what I mean by that is you need to ensure that there are strategic goals or priorities. The terminology really varies depending on the district, but you need to ensure that there's a direction. What does it look like for students to succeed here? What are the big buckets, priorities that you want Sue to focus on so that your students graduate, so that your students are successful, and what you said in your vision statement as a board, right? Reach their full potential after they graduate.
So you mean that should be on the website, the district goals?
It doesn't necessarily have to be on the website, but it is something that boards need to ensure is getting done because, and typically it's on websites. So I'll show you an example.
Because
So-
we have them, we just don't have them.
We'll talk about the strategic planning process, but let me flip forward here so I can show you an example. So this is just an example of one district where it's the district goals. They have a vision and mission as well. Boards can also have their own vision and mission. That's great. But what's really important is that there's some district goals. And typically we say, if you do the process with us, which I'll walk you through now next, we call it setting the strategic direction. Because really it's part of the strategic planning process. It doesn't have to be a strategic plan. Sometimes it's called an integrated plan. But essentially in that, this here, setting the vision, mission, goals, and priorities, is the role of the board to ensure it gets done. So that's the what. The board defines the what, but it's done collaboratively. So what I mean by that is together with Sue and with the community, students, usually it's just really, if you don't have them and you want to do this process, which I'm actually going to be doing one with the board soon, that's okay. You can start from the beginning and create, okay, what are the priorities for the next 3 to 4 years? And you bring in, it's done collaboratively, you bring in students, parents, different voices to help you kind of define what are the priorities. And then Sue takes that and does the planning. And so that's what I mean. The board sets the direction, the vision of where they envision Mapleton students to be. And then Sue would take that direction and figure out, okay, how is that going to get done? And that's usually with strategies, actionable action steps, right? And then the board, that's where the differentiation of roles is. The board, though, looks for alignment. So that's the board's role. So once Sue creates the plan, you can look and make sure that the plan aligns with those that you set, or vision or mission. But what you don't want to do is like say, oh, Sue, you have to do this. That's Sue's job. The operational piece. But you do want to make sure there's alignment and monitor, which is an area that a lot of boards miss. So it's my job, right, to make you aware of the standard and the best practices around it. But the monitoring plan is once everything is done, there's a plan, and I'll be really clear. The strategic plan is like a roadmap. It's a working document, and that's why it's important that the board monitor throughout the year progress on not necessarily the plan, although sometimes there will be, but on the district goals. And what does that mean? What does that look like? So with us, our team has created a little monitoring plan that we help boards to kind of define or identify one area that they want to monitor throughout the year. And sometimes it can be an area that's listed out in the strategic plan, but then you get updates throughout quarterly so that you know progress is being made. That is your job, to make sure there's progress being made. So sometimes, even though I see boards post, like you mentioned, Michelle, the district goals on the website, I'm like, that's great. But how are you holding the system accountable? Do you have a monitoring plan? Do you look at data periodically? No. Well, then how is that? I mean, it's great to have it, but it's important to follow through with the other steps.
I mean, isn't that the function of the school board meeting? But that's where that plays out.
Yes.
Sounds like they're doing that.
Yep, exactly. That's usually where you'll see data reports from staff. Sometimes where I see the disconnect and where it can get to where it's in the weeds is you want to make sure though that it's high level data and that it's tied to the district goals. Yeah. But
And
yes.
when you say the weeds, you mean getting personal or getting specific?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example later, but for example, if you ask Sue, I want to see individual student data, you can't do that, but you can see the whole students, grades, not their grades, but how they're performing overall with state testing and things like that. But if you were to request, and I'll show you later, oh, I want to see what you're doing with the staff member, that's in the weeds. That's not your job. That's the principals to evaluate, just like you evaluate as a board, the superintendent. Yeah, good question. I love that you're connecting the dots. You're like, well, I've been here. I'm the longest. Yep. So again, that's the board's role, to monitor, to make sure that there's progress being made on the district goals that were set collaboratively. I know it's a lot of information, so pause me if you have any questions. Again, I'm happy to share these slides after today's presentation. Okay. So this is just a sample. There's a lot of different ways it can look.
Can you read one of those goals that are on there?
Can I read one? Yeah, so this is just a sample. So advocate for policies and funding that benefit the district and serve the broader community. And I've actually, what I would recommend and how I've seen it, I probably should put it on here, is like creating priorities. And it's like academic excellence, for example. I've done it with boards. And then underneath that, there's a little vision statement to go with, what do you mean by academic excellence? What does the board want to see in terms of academic excellence? That's just an example. I probably should have put
I
that
know
on there.
this is something you do, and we would pay you to do. Is this something we can do on our own?
You could, yeah, and you can even ask for like some guidance if you don't want it facilitated and if it's expensive. The other thing too, I have done it virtually if you want to kind of alleviate some of it or like get you started and then you take it on, so that way you can kind of see what it looks like. So there's lots of ways that you can maybe figure out how to do it. Yeah.
I mean, it looks to me like we could go online and look at other districts' goals.
You could, although I wouldn't recommend that. I would really focus in on your community, on your, I always say, even when I do these trainings, for example, they're not cookie cutter. I tailor them based on your needs. And that's why I asked intentionally, what are you looking for? So that as I'm then presenting, I know what to keep an eye out for. Yeah. But yeah, I would recommend just copy and pasting from districts. I would say you can probably create your own. But we can give you examples of kind of like do first like big focus areas. And if you do it with us, it is, we would help you so that it's, you involve a lot of different stakeholders. But we can also kind of walk you through some of it and help you, I think.
Yeah, if I can just comment, like Michelle, I heard you say like we have goals, but I don't know if we have board set goals, and so we're required by lots of processes to have
Yes.
community engagement, and so like our integrated plan that I share an update, like there's the outcomes in there that were here before I was here. We barely modified and still have. But I don't know if those are the district board goals or the district goals. I think there is opportunity. And then just, I'm going to share this on Tuesday's board meeting, but we're going to do the accreditation process and become accredited. And I think through that process, we'll elevate a ton of input to then say, okay, here's the district goals in alignment with all the other goals we already have. But I do think it's an opportunity to say from the board, this is, as a district, these are our board goals for the district, for the superintendent, for those things. I was actually surprised that was what you read.
Do you want me to read it?
The advocating for policy and funding.
Yeah.
That sounded board specific to me. Can you read one more?
Sure. Continue to invest in facilities that support quality education for students, provide a rewarding environment for staff, and serve the broader community. Facility planning is sometimes a big focus area. Let's see. Implement an effective talent management strategy that attracts and supports an exceptional staff. So that's on staff again. That's why you then create the how, because you know your staff, you know what needs to get done. They look a lot of different ways. I mean, I've seen some focused on career and technical education. It really just kind of depends. Social emotional learning has been a focus area that I've helped boards in the past. I've done this process a lot. My whole team has. But I'm also aware that it's an expense, and like we can kind of figure out strategically or like talk to you and like, let me know kind of the accreditation, what's happening, and we can obviously be a guidance and a resource.
Okay. Yeah, because I think what level they get written at and who, I don't know, like those were different than I was expecting you to read.
Yeah, and you know what? This is an old one. I probably should have updated it. And I'll probably, let me share it. a better one with you that has, Mount Angel is a great one. If you look it up, just Mount Angel School District, theirs is really good. And I know they had, I think somebody helped them like marketing stuff to market and create this beautiful like pamphlet. But we're looking at how can we also maybe support in that too with our communications department. Nothing has been decided, but again, we're always constantly looking at how to improve too and be aware of the different sizes of school districts and like the capacities in terms of funding and whatnot. But yeah, I'll share with you a better one. But essentially, the big takeaway here is that the board sets the direction, superintendent does the planning. And to do that, and the reason why we say it's collaborative, and it's when I've done it, parents, students are involved, the staff at different levels across the halls. I'm not just talking administrators, coaches, counselors, if you have them, you name it, who's going to be able to let you know what the needs are of students in your district. So do you know who your students are and their needs? Or how could you know who your students are? So I'm asking the board right now, do you know who your students are here at Mapleton School District? And I don't just mean visibly, and I know it's a smaller community, but do you know who your students are?
I mean, some of us know very well many of the students. It is a small community.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess, and I'm sure there's so many more things to know. But like on some level, we know almost all the students.
Yeah. And typically, and that's why I was like, I'm aware of that because in smaller communities, you obviously are more visible. Students probably know who the board is, but in bigger districts, students probably may not even know. I mean, I myself, growing in the education system, had no idea there was a board. I wish I did. I thought superintendent was the highest level, right?
It's one of the beauties of a small district.
Yeah.
It really is familiar.
Yeah.
I don't know like every single detail of like their home life and stuff, but I know like 2/3 of the students by name. I admit that I don't know the elementary as well as I do the middle school, high school anymore because my daughter's not in elementary school anymore, but I know a lot of them. Yeah. Or I know who their siblings are, I know who their families are, and I know many of their needs.
But I'm not sure the flip side, like you said, that the students know the board. I don't know that's true necessarily. Like in the middle school and high school students, some of them do, but I doubt elementary school students could say anything about the board or the role of the board or anything like that. Or who's on the board.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's one thing, right? Visibility and even just knowing what the board is. But even just in terms of what programs are your students participating in, what programs exist, what are they participating, what are they not participating in, right? And why? Why aren't they participating in those programs, right? And looking at all your students and maybe even subgroups of students and kind of start to see and asking those questions, right? Because if you go back to that belief statement that I showed you a moment ago, right? When you are looking at policies, those are things that boards can think of, right? They can be like, okay, how is this applicable to all of our students? But how would you know that if you haven't seen the data? And that is high-level data, right? To see how many students are participating in programs and whatnot. I know it can be a little tricky though in smaller communities. I know what you're thinking. I've worked all over Oregon. I've worked with lots of small urban small size school districts. Yes, you have to be careful because you could identify an individual. So you don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
So that's Sue's job to figure out, okay, how can I get this information to the board? Maybe it's just an overall kind of report, right? A staff member gives in terms of like overall the programs or something, right? There are ways to do it, but yes, I knew what you were thinking. All right, cool. Great. And so data,
I just wanted to give you a little piece of information.
Yeah.
We've all lived here a very long time in
Yeah.
this district. It's Sue's new. So in some ways, because we know the community, she leans on us about the community. So there's ways, it's not necessarily name specific, but we definitely have more information on our community. Maybe you're getting up to snuff because you're 2 years.
Yes, well, but there's dynamic. I mean, every time I learn something about a connection and I think I have it all mapped in the version. Somebody threw something else out, and I'm like, what? So,
Yeah.
and it's not
Oh, I
just
love
about,
that.
I mean, that's kind of like who's related to who and those kind of things, but like, I think just in general, historical, like
Mhm. Yeah,
context and
absolutely.
things we've gone through or not gone through and those kind of things, like, yeah, I love the storytelling
Mhm.
of, and history. Like, I mean, I just took you over to see the
I
pictures on the
know,
walls.
that was
I
awesome.
do that all the time.
I love
because
that.
I try to connect what I'm hearing to like the experiences
Yeah.
for years and years. And so, yeah, but I do think that's a huge role, different that like, right, I worked in 4J as well. Like,
Yeah.
that's a different type
Yes.
of board knowing their district. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the superintendent is asking the board, tell me about all the connections and history and whatever of 4J. I mean, at some level, yes, but not at the level that we do. And in a small community, it's huge.
I love that you bring that up because when I forgot to mention this because we're going to talk about it later as well, in that balanced governance in terms of staying informed and in terms of, we're going to get to it when we talk more about the board and superintendent relationship, just like Sue needs to keep you informed, also the board should keep the superintendent informed. And we're going to talk about it, especially when it comes to like something you hear out in the community, especially in smaller communities. And we have a scenario that we're going to work through. I want to give it all away. But it's a really good example of that balanced governance and putting it into application. Because I'm a strong believer, like putting it into application and applying it into your work is how you're going to retain the information, right? It can be up here and show you all the slides, but it's once you actually put it into practice, they're going to start to retain it. And that's why we do the little scenarios that I'm going to show you later. But yes, it is important. I tell boards, especially in smaller communities, if you hear a buzz or something happening, letting your superintendent know. The superintendent may know, but you don't know that. And so then the superintendent can let you know, oh, thank you, I'm aware of it and I'm working through it, or oh, I did not know that. And then maybe like you're saying, that historical context, or you know the community, so maybe you know some information, but giving it to Sue and not trying to resolve it yourself. That's important too. So we're going to talk about that in terms of the role of the board when the community comes to you, because they think, and I don't know about here, but usually what I find is the community goes to you first, the board. They think you can solve it all. You're at the top. You're leaders, but there's policies, there's laws, and that's what the community sometimes isn't aware of. Okay. So what I was just going to show here in terms of data, when it comes to looking at to know who your students are when you're trying to define your vision for the district or the priorities for the district. Quantitative data is great, right? Looking at numbers and graphs, but it sometimes doesn't tell the full picture. So that's why you want to make sure staff and whoever, they can talk more about what the data shows. But qualitative data is just as important too. And so that's so that way you can identify student needs, identify gaps, even identify strengths too. You want to, celebrate those wins as well. It's important, and you want to maintain those strengths as well. And then it helps ultimately with future planning, whether you're planning a strategic plan or not for the next 3-4 years. Budgeting, it helps with that as well. And policy making and decision making, which I know you all are aware of your role when it comes to adopting policies. This is just kind of indicators of what kind of high level data, right? So knowing your students, racially, socioeconomic diversity, academic wise, state test scores, health and wellness, the social and emotional well-being of your students and physical well-being, program enrollment, participation, attendance, graduation rates, which we all care about. So that's just some ideas of some of the data indicators. And this is just some reflection questions that I like to share with boards of how they can start to think about and apply that belief, right, of all students can learn. When you look at data, do you notice or see patterns in the data, including gaps? Are there certain populations or subgroups of students that are graduating at lower rates? Attending school, attendance is a big indicator. Attending school at lower rates than others. Why, right? If so, why? How is the district performing within different grade levels? Does the data have any correlation with your district vision, mission, and goals? Or is there something missing? Maybe you realize throughout the year, oh wow, we need to really change our focus. And that's okay. They're not set in stone. I always tell boards, when you do set your goals, the district goals, review them every year, because it's important. It's again a roadmap for you. You can change it, essentially like a working document, if you need to, right? And we all know that happened many years ago, where things had to shift. So yeah. And then does the data tell the board how district goals are progressing? That is your goal. Okay. I know that was a lot. I'm going to keep us moving unless you have any questions or comments to that section.
Yeah, in general, like it's back to the data thing that you saw on my face earlier, but like I don't understand. Like it's often when I see presentations like this, it's like, oh, look at the data, look at the data, look at the data.
Mm-hmm.
It really looks so different for us here.
Yeah.
So like I have trouble translating like look at the data to like what does that mean for us? Because for us it's like there isn't data, and there really isn't. It's not like data. You know, it's not, there's not enough kids who take tests to say something about the school population, or even say necessarily, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So in that case, I think it just ends up being really hard not to get down in the weeds. You're talking about. So yeah, just a comment like on how difficult it is to translate a presentation like this that's for all different schools. To, you know, like
Because I think like for us, we question more of like, but how is it going, or how is that working, or how does that happen, or like even like the survey thing we were talking about of like how are staff feeling about certain things at all different levels, and it's kind of more, you're right, how our data comes.
Yeah. And then it's hard not to get in the weeds because then you're like asking about one student or two students or, you know, whatever. And then that kind of sends you down that path. So like, I don't know if as you're giving this, like if there's ways you could translate. That would be
Absolutely.
Can you go back to that list of data real quick?
Sure. This one?
Oh,
or the indicators.
Yeah, sorry, the indicators. Yeah. So like, I mean, attendance is the one I always get stuck at because like I've been sharing attendance data and it's also our goal, right? Like we recognize if we can't get kids to school, we're probably not going to meet their full potential, right? And so that's been so it's an indicator and a goal, and that's probably true in a lot of districts, right? But I keep questioning, is that a district goal or a district goal, right? Like a board goal, and I think that's where
I would say it's a district goal. So let me try to explain it. So let me go back to yours and then yours. And this is great. These are the kind of conversations that I want to have. My goal is not to run through all these PowerPoint slides. And if we don't get through all of them, we'll I can still send them to you. So I hear you, and I'm curious then, how do you get information? So usually it's just like, what does that look like then when you do get information? Just so I can have a better understanding.
I think it is like as those things come up that maybe we're not going to be able to run data and pull that kind of stuff, or we're not going to see it in that way. It is a lot of conversation, a lot of just questioning more, whether it's when we're in a meeting or if it's something we seek out on our own, right? Like it's conversations we're having off times with Sue, or we come to her and.
Do you ever have staff come give you updates on anything that's happening? So let's say attendance rates, for example, or early literacy.
So, we do have like both an update on elementary, middle, and high school, and it includes things like attendance or, numbers of students who graduated, or things like that. So we have data to work with, and we have those things.
Yeah.
The information is being conveyed to us. But there's no, it's no sort of standardized, it's not standardized data in any way, it's not like, and so, I don't know, I would say we receive information, a lot of information through board meetings and through things like that and stuff. And we do, because we're small, sometimes, like individually also ask questions and get information. But
so I want to go back. So thank you for giving me some more context. And I know you mentioned you don't want to get into the weeds, but it's hard in smaller communities, especially when you need to ask those questions, right? To kind of get to the point of like, okay, what do we need? What even information do we need? I wrote that up there, expectations and setting clear expectations, because this is the conversation the board has to have with the superintendent. And we have a process like a board operating agreement, which I know you have, but that's what board operating agreements are for. Even sometimes board operating agreements, even how information is received, setting clear expectations around what can the board look at? When are you going to be giving the board maybe updates, etc.? This process that I walked you through is kind of a way to help you stay in your role, because if you set those district goals, then you have a direction of kind of what, and that's why I said, as you're getting information, you may have to shift it and you're like, oh, we wanted to prioritize this, but we're hearing that this is a need. So why don't we change that? And Sue, is there a way that we can change that? You know, maybe not right away, but like, you know, have that conversation. So that's, I think, one thing I would recommend is setting like the actual district goals and figuring out what those priorities are. I like to call them priorities, not district goals, because really that's what they are. They're priorities. And so then that can kind of help you and guide you a little bit. But I would say also really important to have these kind of conversations and this space, which is sometimes what boards are missing, is that opportunity to be able to have, you know, it's important to carve out time for work sessions so that you can have and maybe set some clear expectations, even around information sharing.
Yeah, so the board meetings have really changed over time. We used to have staff members from different areas come and present more often. We also used to have all our administrators at our meeting. Now we just have students. We do have a board superintendent agenda setting every month, and that's rotating amongst the board members. I'm the chair, so I'm always at those meetings, but we always have someone else. So we're having, what I see as a hole in our operations is board work session.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and maybe, I don't know, one takeaway from what she was saying was, because things are so small, or like, let's say, program enrollment and participation or something, like if there's certain things that are happening at the school and who's involved in that, who's not involved in that, maybe like that, like setting clear expectations is, okay, we are finding out about this thing, we're not gonna have this quantitative data in the same sense of that, but like, okay, well, we would like to hear from those that, like, that's our clear expectation, right? That we want to hear next month. But if we set that clear goal, not just like, okay, well, we'll report back to this, you know, and we hope to hear back on that soon, like give a measurable, clear expectation, right? That it holds everyone accountable. We can get the feedback because then we can move on it faster if it's not working or is working.
I wonder if the change, just reflecting out, the change is indicative of the fact that so much of our staff lives outside the district, and back in the day, that they lived closer in. So coming to a board meeting was not, asking too much of an already overworked staff member.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, the administrative side of it is just a lot of people still Wednesday nights, you know, those kind of things, and I think where we'll be next year, we'll have.
Well, what I'll say too is, and that's what that monitoring plan is helpful for too, because it's not the role of the board to have, and Sue can be giving
In place, I think the next stage is let's make sure we all are sharing those same goals and name a couple indicators, because we do have data. I mean, we have some of this stuff, and we can certainly get this stuff, and some of it's quantitative, but some of it's qualitative, and we can bring that in and say.
I was just thinking being intentional about, we get to select what those indicators are, and that would be good, because we can select ones that fit.
Yeah, us,
Yeah.
exactly.
And it gives you something to measure against of like, well,
Yes.
I'm just not grabbing that, whatever.
Here's
Just spew info.
Yeah.
I feel better.
But what I'm hearing is, carve out your next work session should be maybe you discuss what should the priorities be.
Yeah, and it's good timing.
Yeah, it is. A lot of boards are doing that for their board retreats. I'll be doing a lot of those. Okay, so let's move us along, and I will give us a break. I know there's food, so feel free to grab and eat while I'm presenting and stuff. Okay.
So is this a working, we're not gonna take a break, we're gonna do
We can take a break. Yeah, we can take
We're
a
gonna grab food and just keep, I mean, we can.
Yeah, go grab food, and then I'm gonna give you a break at 4:30 to do like a either or. I don't mind. But I was thinking around 4:30, I'll give a break for bathroom and all that. But if you want to eat right now, go for it too. Okay. No, you're good. It's important to take care of ourselves. So standard 2, community engagement. Oh, this one is fun. This one is of high interest, and I mentioned earlier, right? You have to partner with each other as a board, you have to partner with the superintendent and then the community. And usually boards, when it comes to community engagement, go to public comment, right? That's like the most common avenue. In your packets, I provided that policy. If you want to pass those around, take one, pass it down. So in that packet, I wanted to call it, this is your policy here, and you'll have it in front of you as well. And I'm going to call it a couple things in your policy. And again, you should have public comment. We recommend you have it. It's up to the board, though, how they want the community to engage. I actually saw, I think, in your policy that you don't have public comment during work sessions, which is fine. You can do that. And what I want to say when it comes to policy, you want to look at when it was revised and adopted. And kudos to all of you because it was adopted in 2022. So pretty recently. We have a policy department at OSBA. We have a lot of different departments on the board development. We have a policy department who shares out policy updates. And so it's important to do that. And it looks like you're keeping up to date with those. But there are a couple things I wanted to highlight.
The question about we don't have a policy, or we don't have public input at work sessions, that's not in our policy.
It is. No, it is. I'm pretty sure I saw it. And I'm going to call it out here in a second, which is good. Well, it's up to you. I mean, good or bad, it's up to you to decide. So a couple things I highlighted. The board may, that's why it says may conduct a meeting without public comment. That is true. Some boards may conduct public comment. That is up to the board, right? But all your meetings are open to the public, including this one. It's a work session, which is essentially a special meeting, are open to the public. But when it comes to public comment, or how you want to engage with the community, that is up to the board. But you have policy too. You want to make sure, I always tell boards, when you're not sure about the answer, start with your policy. Even board secretaries call me, I'm like, what does your policy say? Let me pull it up, let's look at that. And if that's not there, your board operating agreement or public meetings law. So in your policy, I highlighted that, and I did that intentionally because it says may. Number one, they're listed. Public comment is limited to a designated place on the agenda. That is true. And then you have a person speaking. Number three, a person speaking during public comment may comment on a topic not on the published agenda. Okay. Number four, if there's a spokesperson designating somebody so it doesn't get repeated, the same topic or concern. I wanted to highlight this one, number five. A person giving public comment is limited to an established time limit of 5 minutes. That is up to the board. I typically see about 3 to 5 minutes on average. The board chair has the discretion to waive time limits. Additional time will be allocated in a fair and equitable manner. So as a best practice, what I'll say about that, especially because it says they're right, allocate in a fair and equitable manner. But then above that, it said that the board chair may waive or extend the time. Be careful as a best practice, because if you extend the time for one person, you need to extend it for all. And let's say you extend the time to the third person and you did it to the first. Well, there you go. You're not following your policy. In my opinion, you wouldn't be following that last line of the policy there. So I always say as best practice, decide to either extend it for all or don't. So that way someone doesn't feel like, hey, how come they got 30 seconds extra and you cut me off at the 1 minute mark? So you want to be fair and equitable with that. So I wanted to call that out. Number 6, inquiries from the public during designated portion of the agenda will not generally be responded to immediately by the chair and may be referred to the superintendent for reply later date. So this is a big one because it can be hard on both sides for somebody from the community sharing and expressing some concern, and the board essentially can't respond. It's a best practice. We don't recommend that you respond, so that way, you need to listen to the whole community and all the concerns. And usually when it comes to public comment, not always, but for the majority of, most of the time, it's gonna fall under the purview of Sue, not the board. And if it is under the purview of the board should discuss that later. Not during public comment, because you don't want to create, if a board member were to respond, or even the chair respond to that individual, and another board member chimes in, and then you're like, no, that's not right. You don't want that to happen in a board meeting. So best practice is always just listen during public comment. But what I will say, because it can be frustrating for the community to just see the board up there being like, yeah, like, nodding your heads, like I said earlier. The chair can maybe read a little script, and we have even like scripts written out that we've shared with our board administrative professionals to share with boards, where it explains why. Why isn't the board going to be listening or responding to you? This is just a time to listen, and this is because we want to listen to the whole community, right? It's just this tiny little script that can just set some expectations before opening it up to public comment. And then the other thing, so I did mention the board will not hear public comment at board work sessions. That's listed in your policy, which is fine. You can do that. And then the big one at the bottom of this policy, if you haven't seen this before, comments regarding staff members. So public comment, individuals can offer, the community can offer objective criticism about the district as a whole, but they cannot hear any individual complaints or comments about a staff member. And in smaller communities, even saying like the high school math teacher, that already singles out that individual. Even though they're not saying the name, that is, in my opinion, going against this policy. And so the chair has to, stop that and say, refer to policy KL, public complaints. And then you have a AR, which essentially is an administrative. So this is the policy. So on the code up here, BDDH on the top left corner. But then you also have an AR, which is an administrative regulation. So it's usually a procedure that then gets implemented aside from the policy. And so this is one, and it's essentially just the intent to speak, and it kind of just reiterates some of the things that were already said in the policy. Okay. So again, best practice is to listen. But what I'll say about community engagement, in my opinion, I don't think public comment is a meaningful way to engage with the community. It can give you an idea of what's happening and concerns, and start to maybe bucket like maybe there's an area that you need to focus on that maybe does fall under the purview. Typically, it will fall under the purview of Sue, but not always. But when it comes to community engagement, it's very complex. It is very systemic. It is not a one-time thing. It's I tell boards, if you're interested in doing more community engagement, understanding your role as a board, because you are supposed to be advocating for your community, listening to your constituents, there are ways to kind of assess your situation, the size of your district, the size of your community, and identify the level of community engagement. Whether that's a listening session, whether that's you leveraging partnerships out in the community. But again, it's important for the board to really understand their role when it comes to community engagement and the superintendent's role. So superintendent publicly leads the district, and you need to support the superintendent, right? So it is important, like we mentioned earlier, if you do hear something from the community, that you're bringing it back and making sure that Sue is aware of that. Tying it back to the vision. So when you do a monitoring plan, this is one way to make the community, to engage with the community in a meaningful way. One, when you're doing that, identifying the priorities for the district, you can bring in the community members to help you identify those priorities. That's one way. Bring in stakeholders, students as well. And then once you create that plan and you've had a strategic plan and you talked about indicators, right? When you're having discussions on indicators, the board can create some talking points of the progress and then agree that they will share this at the next board meeting so that the community is aware of what's happening with those district goals. It's just another way of holding the system accountable, but also letting the community know that you're holding the system accountable. That to me is meaningful. And that's the best practice that we've been sharing with boards when they do the strategic planning process with us. Or if they don't either, they can have the little sheet. But it's nice that the board agrees to what those talking points are and then can share those at the next board meeting. So it gives you a chance to report out, not here maybe from Sue. Sue could do it too. All right, so that's community engagement. This is just summarizing the importance of advocacy, how collaboration comes down to that collaborative governance piece that I talked about earlier. Standard 3, effective leadership. That's what we've been doing today. Knowing your roles and responsibility, knowing what's in policy, knowing your authority and limits, which we're going to dive into some examples. But really, it's you modeling the way for students. You're a leader. And to be an effective leader, you need to know your role. You need to communicate, deliberate, ask the questions That's going to make you an effective leader. Knowing the difference between governance and management is being an effective leader. So you govern, superintendent manages. You're the what, right? You define the what, you define the direction that you want the district to go. Sue is the how it's going to get done. What's going to happen? Here's another policy for you to continue to be an effective leader. It's in your packet, policy BBA. It's in alphabetical order, so it's the first one, first page. And policy BBA, I want to go through a couple things before we go on break. So for this one, I mentioned earlier, right, it's important to understand your individual board authority and limits and responsibilities. So in your policy, which again was readopted in 2022, I want to highlight a few things. So the board member has the authority to act in the name of the board when authorized by a specific board motion. So you as an individual board member cannot speak on behalf of the board unless you have the authority to do so. So when you're out in the community and something gets asked about the board or board business, you can talk, so that's the next bullet, you can express your own personal opinions and be very clear that you're not speaking on behalf of the board. Because if you do that, then you're going against this policy. We kind of talked a lot about this, but I did highlight it. Request for information. You have in your policy how there's certain reports that you can write. It says here, any individual board member who desires a copy of an existing written report or survey prepared by administrative staff can make that request to Sue. So you could ask as an individual to Sue, hey, I want this report. But if there's a monetary value to it, it's expensive to get that report, then the board has to approve it. And that's essentially what that line says. And then we talked a lot too of how important it is to just set clear expectations. What you don't want to have happen, it doesn't say this in this policy, but what you don't want to have happen is always constantly asking Sue for stuff. Hey Sue, I want this. Hey Sue, I want that. Hey Sue. Again, right? Make sure it ties to your role overseeing governance, right? And so once you do set your priorities, then it would make sense to discuss and be like, hey, this is what we may need. Right.
I mean, everything is a monetary request because it's a time.
Good point. Yep. So that's why I even say set clear expectations. Have that conversation. Yeah. And do it in a respectful manner, right? Don't feel like, if Sue says no, Sue needs to explain why, and then respect that, right? That's also important too. And then the last piece, number 4 here on this policy. Individual board members will be informed about the district's educational program, may visit schools or other facilities to gain information, may request information from the superintendent. Again, though, right, you do not have the authority as an individual to direct the superintendent to do something. You cannot tell Sue, hey, you need to take care of this, or you need to do this. So again, don't intervene with the day-to-day operations. That doesn't mean, though, that you're not going to be informed. And that Sue can't, tell you. And if you do approach Sue, and it kind of varies, I'm not going to speak for you, Sue, but you decide what those expectations are. But I have seen some superintendents sometimes offer like coffee chats, so that way board members can come to them and ask them during a certain time questions. Individual board members, not as the board, because then that's a board meeting. No. As individuals. No, because then you would have a public meeting. But you can do, some districts do that as a best practice, again, but you have to figure out what works best for you and set those expectations for each other.
That's why I like the rotating schedule. We implemented that kind of late this year, but that's why I like it, because it keeps the connection with each person.
Mm-hmm.
Just so you know, not every district has this in their policy. There are some districts that will not allow a board member to show up without first clearing it with the Sue, first making an appointment. I mean, we are very fortunate that we have this informal mutual respect for one another, that we can do that.
And like you guys all volunteer, it's
Right.
cool. I would never want to give away.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too. And I've had boards, believe it or not, you get it asked. So like, even if you're a parent, right, and you're volunteering as a parent, you don't have to sue just because you're a board member. But I have had boards ask me, and I'm like, well, you can as a courtesy if you want, because it's a smaller community. I've had boards ask me, like, smaller community, I don't want people to be afraid that I'm walking into the building, but I'm going for my kid. And I'm like, you don't have to tell the superintendent. But as a courtesy, that person decided to tell the superintendent just in case. It's situational too, sometimes, right? What's happening, if there's something occurring. But yeah, usually, but when it's a formal visit though, what I'll say, and that's in a different policy BG, a formal visit where the board is gonna like observe a classroom or something does need to be authorized, or you need to let the superintendent know so the superintendent can let the classroom know, because nobody likes surprises, right? It would be very like, if you're a teacher and you're like, what is the whole board doing here right now? Like, that's scary. So, right, it's common, can be, I'll say common sense, but it's important to, it happens. It happens, and I've had these questions asked before. Okay, the other policy is BBF. That's the next one. That's another, I like to, that's the one we call board's best friend. Yes, board's best friend, just to a funny way to remember the policy. But that's around board member standards of conduct, which we've already discussed a lot of this even tonight. But really, you have to comply with ethics law, your public officials, right? Your volunteer positions, but you're elected by the public. You will treat other board members, superintendent, staff with dignity and courtesy, right? We just talked about that. We just gave an example of what that may look like. You recognize that the superintendent is the chief officer. The board has delegated administrative authority to establish regulations and oversee the implementation of board policy, which we talked about, right? You adopt, superintendent implements. And then the other thing I highlighted here, a board member will keep information documents discussed in executive session confidential. And you also have a policy around executive sessions. Executive sessions too are sometimes situations, like if you're not sure if it should be an executive session, we do have legal, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not an attorney, but we do have attorneys at OSBA if you ever need some guidance, because sometimes it can be situational. So at that point, I would hand it off to a legal attorney or for you to contact your district counsel here. And then board members will treat fellow board members, staff, students, and public with respect while posting online and social media. And we're going to talk about, I'm going to not go too far here because I have a little scenario we have time to go through. But essentially, you can have your own social media accounts. Just like I said, you can speak individually, express your own opinions, and make it very clear. However, even on social media, whether it's right or wrong, the community knows who you are as a board member, and so they may take that as you speaking as the board, right? And that's like, you're like, no, I'm not, but that's just the reality, whether it's right or wrong. And so just be mindful of that. I can't tell you cannot post on social media. That's your own decision, but just be mindful of that, especially in smaller communities. And I think those are the last two. So again, to be an effective leader, you establish focus, you establish direction, which we've been talking about. Right now you're seeing the overlap. You establish expectations. I wrote that up there as well. You have board practices that support leadership. So you're supporting each other, but you're also supporting your superintendent. It's collaborative, you're a leadership model, and you know your authority and limits and responsibility. All right, let's take a break. It's 4:31. Let's come back at, you can make it a working, like you can continue eating while I'm speaking. So is 5 minutes good? Just since we started a little late. Okay. Perfect. So 4:36.
It's 2 hour workshop.
certificate.
Please feel free to enjoy.
Oh, thank you.
Sandwiches and stuff.
So we don't have the bathroom there.
So this, but I was like, what over there? Abby, Mary, you guys want some food?
I do, I just had a thing I have to, yeah.
Not gonna
We did start at 3 and that's still technically my work day, so I just have to like respond to a couple of things, I'm so sorry.
I get it, no worries. Abby, you hungry?
No
No worries. This was that 2 days ago where I was doing another fried burrito section is definitely a favorite of mine. The chicken taquitos are good. I go, and then the
Bacon?
burrito.
have the chicken taquitos there. But the burritos, always.
Yeah, I didn't used to, or I used to just get the burritos and then Camden started grabbing the taquitos and one day I was like, starving. I've been going into the coffee shop and getting yogurt, yogurt parfait.
Oh, yeah.
Too. Mhm. She's doing a good job.
Yeah. It's good. I miss
More
more
meeting
meetings.
series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little less.
Yeah, there was one day I just needed to pound out like something time sensitive and all the things, and I went and head over there instead of here because I can't.
Yeah.
And, spent the day there. It's funny because there were like 3 other meetings of people that I know, and I'd say, like, hey, no, no. I was like, don't let me talk. I have to finish something and go over. But it was just nice to have that kind of
Yeah.
coffee shop feel in the community.
We made the soup.
Result. That, oh, he, John brought it over.
We're gonna grab stuff.
And everything,
Ham everything. Oh, with all the things.
That's what I know. I thought it was like everything.
Like everything bagel bread.
That's what I was saying. Yes. And I was like, oh,
And so just what?
it's vegan. It's like what is it called?
Very vegetable.
Yeah, Moroccan lentil soup or something. Yeah, it's good.
And the salad has cheese in it or something?
I don't believe so. I think everything is vegan.
Man, you can't come to my house. Because
I know. I used to be so annoyed with my friends who they were just boring and tiresome and I didn't feed you.
yeah.
Get a life, and then I woke up one morning and I said, I'm taking a break. I'm just gonna try it. And that was 5 years ago.
Oh,
It's been that long.
Yeah.
you love it.
I watched, well, I mean, it's just not that hard. I watched this film called Game Changers. Have you ever seen that film? It's about elite athletes. And I'm not delusional. I'm not trying to become an elite athlete. But
Still got time.
yeah, no. But it just really was fascinating. Like all these athletes that performed at the highest, the strong bodybuilders, vegan, they don't eat any meat, they don't eat any dairy. And the thing that affected me the most was there was like a graphic of a cutaway of your vessels and the difference between someone who eats meat and cheese and dairy and someone who doesn't. And there's just a lot more buildup. And, I don't know, it was not premeditated. I woke up the next morning and said, just give it a whirl. Here you are.
Me. I'll eat enough for you.
Send it your way, huh?
It smells amazing.
I just have had stomach issues in my life, so I take break from all sorts of foods at different times, but I've done fish, I can't do vegan, like, it's just too much effort to eat like a
Stay away from all the products of it.
Yeah.
It is an effort.
But yeah, I've gotten pretty long chunks without meat, and then suddenly we'll drink meat like crazy. And a good prime rib is usually the end of me. I'm like,
I
I
will
haven't had
say,
meat in 2 years, but that was good.
I will say, I still cook meat for my family, and I always, if Richie's eating a hamburger, I always ask for a bite. I'm not like I'm not fundamentalist.
Yeah.
I want to taste it,
Yeah.
but I
You don't have to eat it
I don't
all.
want a whole one. I just want to.
Yeah, well,
Well, soup is good even though
Hamburgers
are your thing.
get down. When I was pregnant with Josie, I think I ate a hamburger every day.
That was your thing, huh?
I loved it. And I'm like, don't even cook it.
give me
I didn't actually eat it, but I wanted it.
that's how I prime rib. Like,
Yeah.
for the best.
Somebody accidentally kind of did a trench top.
Yeah.
Trench it pretty rare last
Yeah.
night. And I was like, what happened? What's that?
That
Yeah, we finally cooked it. Because like what, Monday night? Something happened Monday night. Tuesday morning had a game. So yeah, it didn't happen till last night.
sitting in my.
Oh, that you took out?
Yeah, I'm just like, when you're like seasoning something and it gets everywhere.
Yeah. That's every time Troy seasons anything. He's like, you don't want to make a mess. Fine, I'll be right behind you. Clean it up.
Well, that's nice for Troy that he has you.
Well, because it's not really gonna get cleaned up otherwise.
Yeah.
Poor Morgan's been in there.
Make it brownies.
Oh my god. She did that the other day.
How's the grandbaby?
So good.
Yeah.
Abby got to hang out with her today. Yeah, she's a really good baby.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
Does her mom work?
She's going back to work now. She's been going back, yeah. Not as I thought she was crazy at first because she's like, oh yeah, she wants me to come back in 6 weeks. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna tell you now you're not gonna do that.
Yeah.
Don't do it, even if you thought you were gonna. You're not gonna get this back. So she took longer, and then she's only doing it like a couple days a week right now. So
How old is she?
3.5 months.
Okay. So many places around the world give paternity breaks, like a year
Mm-hmm.
for the mother and the father.
Well, you can now. There's like what the leave act, right? So you could or you pay leave act. You could do it. Neither like Mitchell would never do it. He's a workaholic. She can take her in on like light days too and take her with. I take her to work with me, which is everybody loves it because when a couple days I took her in there, there's like 4 other moms, so they're like, "Yep, give us baby time."
Just waiting on. How do you say her name? Macy? Macy?
It's like very vegetable. It's so good.
The soup? Okay. Feel free to keep eating. I'll just be talking. All right. So the next standard is standard 4, and that's around accountability. And so what does that look like? Not only should the board, like I've been mentioning a couple times, not to sound like a broken record, should the board hold the system accountable or hold Sue accountable, right? How many of you, I don't know if you use our workbook that we co-developed with the Coalition of Oregon School Administrators, COSA, but you should be doing an evaluation on the performance of the superintendent every year. And vice versa, boards, just like you evaluate and hold the system accountable, need to hold themselves accountable too, and their performance, and assess how they're doing. Right? Or, do you need to have more trainings, et cetera? But if you don't do an assessment, then how are you going to know that? And so we have another tool that's called a board self-evaluation, and it's based on the 12 standards we're walking through right now. And so essentially, if you take this survey, it's done anonymously, even your facilitator will not know who responded to what, because you have to select with a unique identifying number or color to take that survey. But basically, under each standard, there's a set of questions, and the board has to respond on how they think they're performing based on those questions. And then if you do our service, it's a facilitated discussion. You get the results of the report, but then you have a conversation, because again, like I mentioned earlier, numbers don't always tell the full picture. And so it's a valuable tool where the board then can have a conversation of what's working, what's not working, and then essentially create a professional development plan. And it's based on areas of strength, because as I mentioned before, you still want to maintain those areas of strength. And then also you look at the areas of growth. And I like to call them commitments, because as you heard tonight, there's the board goals, there's the district goals, and to just help differentiate that, you can still call them board goals if you want, which I know you already have developed some as a board. I like to call them commitments, and this is what you as a board are committing to based on your performance. So it can be tied to the district goals if you'd like, but it's more so around your professional development performance. Just like when you evaluate the superintendent, it's based on their professional development performance as well. How are they performing as a superintendent to accomplish the district goals, for example? So it is tied. You still want to evaluate on that too, but also what is the superintendent doing? Just like what is the board doing to continue to be up to date, like we mentioned earlier, to continue to know what their roles and responsibilities are, etc. And that's what that evaluation tool, if you use ours or not, or simply if you just ask each other during a work session, what's working, what's not working, jot it down and let's figure out what we need to do. Right? If you do it with us, this is an example of the professional development plan. This is what I develop for boards all the time. I listen, they do the survey, we have a facilitated discussion, and then based on what I heard and what we collected together as a group, I then create this professional development plan with clear action steps that the board is going to hold themselves accountable on what they're going to do throughout the school year. So it's like clear what the commitment is and then how they're going to do that commitment. And they don't have to do all of this in 1 year. But again, similar to what I talked about with the strategic plan, it's just an accountability tool, a guidance tool, so that you can have those conversations and discussions and change it and shift it every year if you need to. And I actually do recommend boards assess themselves at a minimum every other year, at a minimum.
Yeah, we're a little lax on that.
Can I ask, has it ever been a thing?
It has to be a thing. Yeah, you can ask, and that's the answer.
It was like,
Once or twice over 30 years.
Yeah.
Seriously, it's not common practice.
I would suggest, of course, you have to kind of figure out what you want to commit to, but that tool can be very helpful for boards. And then what I heard earlier, right, is work sessions are maybe needed, but so you don't get overwhelmed because you also have your board meetings, where it's your business board meetings. An activity calendar can be very helpful to kind of plan out everything. So once you do that assessment and create a professional development plan, I tell boards, okay, make sure that now you carve out when that's going to take place. And don't do it when it's really busy in March, and as you can see here, January through March is a really busy time for boards. You have the superintendent evaluation, you have the budget committee hearings, and or prepping for the budget. So that's really a busy time. So, look at where areas there isn't so busy. Or maybe, if you don't want to do a training, you say, oh, we're going to go to the OSBA Summer Board Conference because they're going to be covering all the topics, and then you don't have to. So you can kind of plan around. But this is a helpful tool. I'm happy to send it to you if you're interested to kind of help you plan out. And a good time to do that is the July organizational meeting that boards have, where you plan out when your board business meetings are going to take place, and sometimes you can even carve out when your work sessions take place. And so again, this is just accountability. It's setting high expectations. We talked about that at the beginning when I showed you that definition of collaborative governance. Well, now I'm showing you how that shows up or how that may show up, which is setting high expectations for each other, for your performance, for your students, the direction, right? And monitoring as well. There's a lot of different areas and how you can hold accountability. We talked a lot about data, so I'm probably going to run through this one pretty quickly unless there's something else that you think of or you want to pause on. When it comes to data, that's accountability as well, right? Knowing who your students are, asking questions about the data or gaps that are missing or what your students need here at Mapleton. We talked about policy BBA. We talked about where that shows up on your policy in terms of requests for information. That can be data as well, data reports, etc. But here I want to I don't know if we should do this because I think we kind of already did it. But this is a scenario to kind of illustrate, and it may not apply here, so I think I might skip it because we already had a pretty good, rich discussion around how that may show up or how it shows up differently here because you are a smaller community. So this may not be applicable, but typically this isn't something a board member can ask. A board member questions the lack of detail in the data presented for each district goal. One, that's already kind of crossing the line of your standard of conduct, right? And being respectful. So that's being kind of a little disrespectful. While the data provide a good global view, the board member wanted to see the data broken down further by individual classroom in each school. So again, this is more applicable probably for a bigger district. So I'm going to skip it, and that's my bad. Next time I will change that when I come to a smaller district. But I think we had a pretty good conversation about that, and it shows up differently here. And how you're all, I think, aware that you don't want to get into the weeds. You understand the difference between governance and your role and management, how you want to support Sue. But I think it's still important to have that conversation for Sue to hear that, so that Sue doesn't think you are trying to be a micromanager, right? Micromanaging.
Well, and even in this scenario, like a conversation about how to break it. I mean, I think that's for the work session. Like how would you want to see that data? And I can say like, actually, that's 3 hits. I can't do it.
Yes.
Those kind of things.
Yes.
But
Yes.
I do think that this is an important conversation in that work session about what indicators, what data now would be helpful.
Yep. And in that monitoring plan that I'm happy to show you the template, there's even a space of when can that data be presented? Because if it's, let's say, just to bring it out, it's date test scores or something, there's a certain time when those come out. Yeah. So like you're not going to be able to give an update early in the year. It's going to be X. I think it's usually October or November. I can't remember when the state rolls out all those results. But yeah, I think that is an important conversation to have so that you are setting those clear expectations and the board isn't surprised and knows what to expect. Yeah. Good. So in this case, though, if I were to ask it, it's a no. This is not the role of the board to ask for that individual broken down by classroom to assess this piece too, especially assess individual teacher and school effectiveness. That is not the role of the board to assess district staff. So when it comes to data, right, it needs to be high level data, and I know you're going to have conversations around what does that look like for your district. You want to be informed on the progress of the district, right? So you're going to have to do those priorities to be able to do that. And tie it back, the data, whatever data you're looking at, tie it back to those district vision goals once you've established those. And then you'll be able to just tie everything. It really just kind of comes together. So then when you are looking even at policies, you know what the goals are, you know what to look for, you know what information you've received, and even when it comes to the budget as well, which we'll talk more about with the last standard at the end.
Yeah, you do want to put it in the sun.
Yeah. Oh, is it too hot? I'll say it's a little cooler on this side.
Yeah. Oh, we could, yeah, even though.
Oh, just the half.
We also could like scoot.
If you want this spot, you want to.
Oh, no, I'm fine.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That was huge.
Yeah.
Get a sunburn.
That's okay.
Mhm.
Why don't we still? Yeah. Be good.
Okay.
Yeah. The sun's gonna move a bit and.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Almost getting hot.
My back, the back was feeling
I was feeling hot.
I felt
And I
it.
looked at you and was like, gosh.
I felt it was hot when you pulled that down because the face wasn't as hot anymore.
I was originally going to be on that side. I was like, no, it feels cool.
Mhm.
And usually I'm always cold. I know.
If anybody wants dessert, candy.
Oh, okay. So the next one, we kind of talked about this in terms of the belief, but culturally responsiveness is another standard that Tom Halsbury puts in his book of effectiveness and workmanship. And essentially, it's just making sure that your kiddos feel like they are valued, right? And what that looks like. So when you're looking at policies, asking those questions of how is this impacting all of our students, right? And it goes back to that value. And it's recognizing that every student, just like you all, I love to say this because it's a good way to kind of put it into perspective, but just like you all are individuals and you have your own lived experiences and perspectives and whatnot, students are individuals as well. And I'm going to be very transparent. That's what makes education really hard because it's not just, there's so much things external as well, what the student is going through, et cetera. What their passions are, et cetera, right? And so I love that your mission said their full potential or something like that. They're individuals. And so when you're looking at policies, that's your role as a board to remember all your students and to think about all different things when it comes to culture responsiveness, which is essentially that it can include social, economic, there's just so many things, special needs, students with special needs education as well. Right? How are you putting it all into perspective and understanding the diversity? And I'm talking diversity in terms of even just their needs. And then being able to apply that when you are looking at policies and remembering that, or even when you're looking at data and thinking about those questions as well. And again, I can share this. This is directly from the research. And then standard 7, which we talked about. Ooh, what did I step on? Sorry. Standard 7, which we talked a lot about, which is the culture and climate here, your board work, how you communicate, how you operate, how you run your meetings. That's all culture and climate. And so again, it comes down to your collaborative governance, right? And I'm bringing this back just to help you retain that information, that it comes down to how you trust and respect, the policies we looked at around standard and conduct, the shared focus you have, setting high expectations of the board for your performance, for your students, and then that happens to collective responsibility, accountability, and support, right? You're a team. You're a team, and that's okay if as a team sometimes you have differences of opinions, and you may not always agree, but essentially you need to remember that you're doing work for your students. Students come first. And I know you know that. Important, right? That you understand that balance because it can be really hard. I'll be the first to say, I'll acknowledge work is not easy. There's a lot of policies, but it's important work. And you are impacting students who are our future, right? And so that's why it's important to stay in that informed oversight though, so that you don't feel, we do not want you feeling like a rubber stamp board. So your communications, your behaviors, your actions, how you operate, how you run your meetings. We don't want to see this. But believe it or not, it happens. Right? This is not what we want to see. You're at the middle, the guy there at the head table, he's disengaged. Right? He's disengaged. He's like, well, he raises his hand or he laughs. You're like, where'd you find
That's me.
that? Right, this person has
Go home.
That's when I shaved the one week.
it's completely done, right? They're like, I'm done. I'm not even gonna try. Disconnected. What time is it? Is it dinner yet? Right? I'm sure that's what this board member's thinking. There's two people having side conversations, right? It happens though. It happens. And that's important for the role of the chair, who's like the facilitator of the meeting, and to help kind of with that. When that occurs, step in. And let's say the chair is one of them. What if the chair is the one that's engaged in a side conversation? Other board members could chime in too to be like, hey, chair, we need your help. Or, sometimes when it's a new chair too, it can be a little like, I don't know what to do. And so we have a lot of support. We actually have a board chair cafe that another colleague of mine on my team, Vince Adams, who used to be a board member for Valley School District, he runs this board chair cafe monthly so that chairs and vice chairs can discuss and kind of have a support system. And so that's monthly. They're during lunch, typically. And if you're interested, let me know. We'll get you on the listserv for that. But yes.
We're on the list.
Oh, perfect. Great. And so again, this is what you don't want to happen. And to do sometimes what's needed to hold yourself accountable so that doesn't happen is a board operating, or I should say board superintendent operating agreement. Even though you have policy, it's a great way to reinforce what's already in policy or even just clarify. Because sometimes what's in policy may not be very clear, or maybe you just need a little extra support. And so that's what this tool can help with. And you agree to it, you do it together, you set some clear expectations for the superintendent sets some clear expectations for you. I mentioned a great example of that is even how data is going to be shared with you all. That could be in an operating agreement. And then you hold yourself accountable to this tool. And this is a tool too that I would recommend reviewing at a minimum every other year. Because things can change. Maybe you're like, oh, we're doing great. We don't need to do that. Like I've even had board members put in like, we're not going to have marathon meetings because the meetings can run long sometimes. But now they've gotten into practice and they're like, oh, we can take that off now. We've practiced it enough. We know we don't need that in the operating agreement. So again, that's how you create a supportive culture and climate. And by doing that, as I mentioned when I showed you that domino effect visual, right, or the causal chain, that's how you're going to impact students. It starts with you. Oh, learning organization, which I know we've had a little bit of discussion around that already too. And that's simply around spending time together, to learn as a team. So that's whether work sessions, that's if you're attending conferences together and learning together there. It can look a lot of different ways. A really great kind of model to, like a metaphor for it is like PLCs, professional learning communities. And I kind of talked about how you can do that during the setting the direction, right? You can bring in staff members, administrators, or staff across the different levels to come and share together with you all when you're even looking at data, creating those opportunities to learn. Encouraging it and fostering it too, right? And that's okay if sometimes, you're like, we're just so busy, it happens. But then holding each other accountable and being like, hey, we haven't had a work session. Or, you know what? That topic Jana talked about, really, I think we need to have some time. Let's do it. Systems thinking, which we've kind of already talked about, and that's really, again, your governance role. But it's making sure that you're, again, aware of the different partnerships. A lot of this is the role of the superintendent, like partnerships with the Oregon Department of Education and all the meetings that the superintendent attends. But again, remembering that your systems thinking, how you support the system, thinking about education in the many ways, which I already said, it's very complex. I know that, I'm aware of that. That there's a lot that happens when it comes to education. And, we have our legislative team. So I'm not on the legislative team, but they come out and do legislative roadshows to talk about our legislative policy committee priorities, legislative priorities. So that's a good time to keep learning and figuring out what's happening, and maybe it's applicable to you or not. Maybe it's applicable to the district goals. Maybe it's around facility planning or attendance rates. Maybe there's something happening at the state level. So it's important to stay kind of informed in that way. And what I will say too, and how the board can seek that last piece, seek collaborative local state. Our legislative team is going to be doing a webinar and a workshop later on at one of our conferences around the advocacy role for boards, because I think that's an area that just needs some clarification. And so they're working on developing some tools. They already have stuff, but updated information. And that team actually is like completely new. So they're going to have new resources probably as well. That whole team is pretty new. And that kind of goes with when you know what's happening at the state level, or leveraging partnerships with maybe community organizations here in your community, or Sue bringing things, that helps with innovation and creativity as well. So thinking just creatively when you're looking at policies or looking at data, you know, what works here for your students. Thinking, again, types of thinking, sharing, knowledge sharing, and you do that typically during work sessions. Right, standard 11, which in my opinion is roles and responsibilities. So this is around board member conduct, ethics, and relationship with the superintendent, which is so important and so critical. We don't want to see this. And I'm not going to say who's the marshmallow and who's the strawberry. I've been asked before when I showed this graphic. Which one's the superintendent? That's for you to decide. But I hope it's not this. I hope it's not this. You want to be in that balance.
Why is the marshmallow heavy?
I know.
Because it's not being supported, right? It's that support, it's that balance. You want to be balanced. You do not want one.
Balance.
Good point, and that's a good point. I just stole this from the stock images. So. Called out to me.
I get the concept, but like that still matters.
That's a good point. I didn't even think about that. It should be the other way around. Unless that marshmallow is something else. Creative, right? Good point. I love it. So again, right, governance versus management, which we talked a lot about, what versus how. So just to kind of put it all in a nutshell here, the board hires and evaluates the superintendent, which we talked about that and how that's really important, and you have to trust that the superintendent's going to get the work done. That's why you hire the superintendent. You set the district priorities or goals, which we talked about as well, which we know might be an area that you're going to continue to have conversations on. You adopt policy. We looked at some of your policies already. You oversee the budget, and I'll talk more about the budget here in a moment. And then you monitor progress of the district goals, which is what we've been talking about already, but now you're seeing it kind of how we covered all these areas that really are your role in that high level view. On the flip side, the superintendent helps hire staff. They turn those priorities or goals into action, but sometimes it's called a strategic plan, integrated plan. They implement policies or develop administrative regulations, which we looked at, right? Show you some examples. You plan expenditures and manage the budget. And you report on progress of the district goals to the board. Okay, we talked all about this. So we're kind of going. And again, right, in order to do that, you have to have a mutual understanding of your roles and responsibilities. You have to, take this training, especially if you're newer. You have to have that culture and climate that you're a supportive, you're collaborative, you're a team. Any questions? Okay. Budgeting and financial accountability, that is our last standard, and then we're going to have some fun with some scenarios. So for this one, I want to make it clear, it is the board's role, and you saw that they oversee the budget. It is not the role of the board to look at every single budget line item, and you don't want to do that either. You have your budget officer, which you're the budget officer, right? Back there? Okay, that's what I thought. You have your budget officer. What you want to make sure, and that's why it's important to have those district goals, so that that's your direction. So when you're looking at the budget, the board should make sure there's alignment with that in the budget. Typically, that's going to come from the budget narrative that's read by the budget officer. And then what I've seen as a best practice that I like to share is that then there's certain line items that can be highlighted that align with the district goals so that the board can then see in the budget, oh, where are those resources being allocated? And that's how it's connected to your role of making sure that they're in alignment with the district goals where you're seeing progress, which again is going to show up in the funding sometimes as well. So that's what I wanted to share in terms of budget and your role. And we have a lot of, it can be, I recently was told, there's a lot of information when it comes to the budget, revenues, and the education streams and understanding that. And so we have resources, we have information too. We just revamped our budget committee hearing handbook. It hadn't been revamped for a lot of years, so we just revamped it. And so you have that as a resource now too for the budget committee process, because that's a lot of information as well. And then we have webinars, and we did a partnership with the WASBA, the Oregon Association of School Business Officials. And they helped kind of talk about the difference of the revenue streams and also within your role of the board, which you should be looking for. And so I encourage you to utilize our resources. They're on our website, and you also have as a member a login where you get access to all of our documents that aren't on the website. All right, let's have some fun. What time is it? Ooh, we're doing great with time. So now we're going to do some scenarios, and I'm going to ask you to reflect first on that. Actually, would you prefer going in pairs or doing this as a big group?
I don't know, because I don't know what it's going to be like.
What's your recommendation?
Pairs would be fun because then you can bounce off each other ideas and see. So let's try it. We'll try it out, and then I'll kind of assess. So we'll do pairs. So we'll do you two, you two, you two, and then what we'll do. Actually, you're seasoned. You're seasoned. Okay, that's perfect. So we'll do 2, 2, 2, and just reflect and discuss with your pair this scenario that I'm going to share, and then I want to hear from each of you what you shared with your partner. Report out as a big group, and we'll talk about best practices around the scenario. Okay, so I'll give you like 2 minutes to each group. All right, scenario 1. An upset staff member who is also a parent approaches you, a board member, at the grocery store and asks if you can please help them with a complaint about their child's teacher. Their student's teacher has been assessing and grading them unfairly, and the staff member believes it's retaliation for a tough parent-teacher conference from earlier in the year. They mention they have tried connecting with the teacher and have been unsuccessful, and now they feel retaliation in their own job. So this is very layered. So I want you to kind of, with your pair, discuss how this situation should be handled and maybe what's the role of the board here.
They're feeling retaliation towards themselves as a teacher or towards their child?
Their teacher. No, as a teacher. Retaliation of their own job, because it's a teacher who is also a parent. Yep. But discuss with your pair and kind of dissect this and kind of decide how the situation, if you're the board member, should be handled.
So the staff member who's also a parent, he defines staff member as a teacher.
Yep.
The staff member here can mean.
Oh, it's a teacher. So the staff member is a teacher. Yeah.
So they're come up to you.
I know.
And the kids and the school stuff.
Hence the reason I brought my friends.
Right. And if you didn't get help with the don't have to mind that.
And you can let it be whoever actually.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's what
Start wrapping up your thoughts with your pair.
We're wrapped up.
we're at.
You're like, I got this.
We've
We'll
been-
start somewhere else then.
We've been here.
Like very, very occurrence in this. Like this could happen anytime you went to the grocery store.
And I'm aware. I'm aware of that. Okay. Come back to the group. I'm gonna start, unless I have a brave volunteer from either of these pairs, but one of you start.
One of them or us.
Yeah.
I'll go.
You'll go? Okay.
Yeah, I would, I mean, which what I've done before is if they've reached nothing with a teacher,
Mhm.
then they need to go to the principal.
Mhm.
If for some reason they didn't reach some, didn't get responses or conversation there, then they could go to the superintendent, but they need to go to the principal first. Chances are they'll have some sort of conversation with them. But, I mean, there's a level of who you go to.
Mhm.
Like you said, we don't do staff, so.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything to add to what Andrea said?
I mean, just, Andrea.
Andrea, sorry.
Annie. I'm sorry. I get Marie all the time, and so I'm always like, I like
It's Andrea, he says?
Andrea.
Andrea.
Yeah.
Andrea, okay.
I just liked, me as you had said kind of something, we same thing, just like there's a process. And, sometimes folks don't want to hear that there's a process, then maybe just wanted to. And so one thing that we kind of called out was just like an empathetic response, but then district. What did you say? Assistant. Wait, no, you said an empathetic, what did you say? You said something and then a district response.
Yeah.
An empathetic.
That's the right word.
No, it was an empathetic something and then a systems response.
Listen,
She's muted out.
Yeah. It's like,
You'll
like a
remember
sympathetic ear or
at 3 in the
something,
morning.
it's something like that. It's like a sympathetic ear, but a systems response. So still responding with like care and just like recognizing that really sucks and I can understand this is important to you. Here's the steps you need to take.
Okay. What did your team discuss?
thing, but as Sue said, you also can direct them to the policy and the things that you do. This is how we do it here. And also, you give a heads up.
Ooh, I love that.
Yeah.
Yep, which we talked about earlier, right?
Mhm.
If you hear buzz out in the community, making sure, one, I want to, so it's very layered, and it's purposely that way. But I love what you said. What was your name?
Mary.
Mary, I love what you said about empathetic, right? You can absolutely listen and be, just listen to them and hear them out. Sometimes they just need a vent, right? And again, they're going to come to you because they think the community usually thinks that the board can resolve everything. I always tell boards, a board member, board members don't know what they do sometimes until they run for the board and they become a board member.
Yeah.
And the community too sometimes doesn't know. And most of the time I will say don't know what your role is. They don't come to this training. Like I'm sure if they came, they'd be like, what? So you're absolutely right. What you want to be careful though is to not, you can tell them the process, but don't tell them to do a complaint. Just be very careful with that. You can guide them and say, there's a policy for you can go to the district website. You actually have it. It's KL right here in your packet. It's at the end. Just be very careful to not say, oh, you should file a complaint.
Do that.
No, but I'm saying,
Yeah.
not saying that you would, but I would not do my job if I don't give you that heads up in case that happens. And again, right, we talked about your individual authority and expressing your own feelings, which you said right now, right? You can listen to them as an individual. Just don't speak on behalf of the board. And yes, essentially what it comes down to is what you were saying, that there's a step to follow and the board is not the first step. You're the last step. Sometimes you're not even a step. If you look at your policy, it starts at that individual level. And so, yep, I wouldn't even ask questions in this case. I would just listen and then just go to the policy. Let them know there's a policy around this. Because you don't want to catch yourself accidentally giving some sort of advice. So that would be my my recommendation on how you should handle this. But you all captured exactly everything that was layered in here. The fact that it's a staff member who's also a parent, just like sometimes you're a board member who can also sometimes be a parent, right? Okay.
I didn't catch all this, the aspects.
What? Sorry.
Didn't catch all the aspects.
Ooh, what's another one?
Based on that last line, now they feel retaliation in their own job.
Ooh.
If this is staff on staff and it creates a hostile work environment,
Mm-hmm.
you might need to talk to HR.
Maybe go to
Yeah.
Janet.
Doesn't refer to me, so.
Right.
Don't.
So don't focus on that part, right? Okay.
And that might come out in the investigation, right?
Well,
If they do end up filing a complaint, then it could lead to you, and yeah, and maybe Sue would bring it up to you, right? If the board member, well, the board member should, right? Keep the superintendent informed. Hey, I heard this. You can either say, "Oh my gosh, I wasn't aware," or "Thanks for bringing it to my attention," or "Yep, I'm aware of it," and leave it at that, right? You don't have to go into the details. The board does not need to know the details.
But
And
because,
there's
like, the
sometimes
principals-
HIPAA, privacy rules.
Is both of their supervisors, can't they, like, I would think the entirety could be taken to the principal as that person in there, right? Like, even the fact that, okay, well, now I feel like she's retaliating against me. Like, you can take, because that's their first supervisor, right?
Well, yeah, because you can follow the steps, right? The first step is the teacher. If that doesn't work, then it's the principal. That doesn't work, then it's the superintendent, and then it's the board, right? And even then, the board could say, leave it up to the last decision of the superintendent. Or it could also get to the level, which hopefully not, but it could also get appealed to the deputy superintendent, right? And it can get situational, and at that point, sometimes legal advice.
Who's the deputies?
Right now, that used to be name.
The superintendent,
At the state level.
Yes, yeah, the state level. Yeah, and I'm blanking out on the name because it used to be.
It was called, but Dr.
Yeah.
Williams.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Well, that's the Oregon Department of Education.
Is that who we're talking about?
No, the
On
deputy
state
superintendent is somebody else, and I'm blanking out because he just retired, and it's somebody else now. But yeah, a deputy superintendent of public instruction. But it's in your policy. It's the last one. But essentially, for this scenario, all you need to know as a board is you're not the first stop.
Right.
Yeah. And then you have your policies if you want to reference those.
Mhm.
And there's the complaint form in your policy as well. Well, it's an AR, right? Remember we talked about ARs, administrative regulations. All right, let's do, what time is it? Oh, wow, we're doing really well with time, but we can end early too. Yeah, I know it's a busy day. Okay, a board member posts a question on Facebook asking for input on the high school math teacher's behavior.
Don't do that.
The board member states that their daughter is upset because of the way the teacher runs her classroom and wants to know if others are having the same concerns. The board member makes themselves available for questions by text, email, and social media. The board member goes to the superintendent and shows them the concerns, wanting something to immediately change. Board member also emails other board members for their input and tells the superintendent that if they do not deal with this, they will bring it up at the next board meeting. Discuss with your parent. I know there's a lot happening here. What is the role of the board here? Maybe discuss what's right, what's wrong in this situation as well. So in your little pairs for about a minute.
Yeah. I don't know how they would address that. Don't do that.
You would think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then I go to Sue to tell them, you better make, well, board member. That's for everyone else. And then.
Nice translation.
I mean,
I'm gonna go tell
There
them.
is like.
How bad?
The board member in this case is a parent,
And
and if they.
if you don't-
And yes, raise that. My opinion.
Just no.
That could be the
Yes,
best.
no.
They don't do that. So I think that's right. I think about the teachers.
Yeah, but.
And that's.
All right, start wrapping up your thoughts.
Where, and that's what, where it's crossing the line.
When you're ready, eyes up here, please, when you're ready.
So that's what it is. I think part of it is the wording here. Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna start on this side this time since we started over here. So what did your pair talk about? What did you discuss?
I mean, lots of different spots in this chain of actions to kind of cover, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think Mary brought up a good point and question that is that sort of in the beginning, if the person states that they're like we have a role as a parent and as a board member in that way, and so how okay is it to say I'm speaking only to identify as speaking as a parent, and here's my issue. There's some question there about that, but like anyway, there was that we talked about that, and then like there's so many other points in there that become problematic. That the dealing with staffing stuff as a board, like that's not our role.
Yeah.
And emailing each other like as a group is not okay because that's public. That could constitute public meetings. So stuff like that. So I don't know. Those are some of the things.
Great. Anybody else want to add? Did you say anything different or?
I mean, I think that, honestly, I think if that happened, for one thing, we know about it before it got to even the second part.
That's what I'm saying.
Just,
The board member makes themselves available?
no, and the board
Just
member
post
posted a
on
question on Facebook, but.
Oh, yeah, because you'd see it.
We hear about it.
We just see if someone's calling us.
Yeah.
Or someone's texting you, go look at this.
There's probably 5 different Facebook posts throughout this year that
Yeah.
make it into my office before like.
Or it could make it into the front page newspaper too.
Right.
Yeah.
But I would say that the board chair should chat with the board member about what is kosher and what's not kosher. Point them to the rules of engagement. That is not cool. We can't do any of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's all, every step of the way, that person is clueless about the
Mm-hmm. I love that. So the board chair talking to the individual.
Well, and I think the same rules apply if you're upset as a parent. Did you talk with the teacher? I mean, before going crazy public with it,
Yeah.
did you talk with the teacher? Did you
Yes.
talk to the principal?
Yes.
I mean, we do have the luxury of the fact that we are small, we are on the board, we have a constant relationship with Sue. You could have even just went to your superintendent, who's also a principal, who, you could have just went there and started, which they would have said, hey, let's talk to the teacher about this, whatever, before blowing it up. Because the same rules apply, even though you use the luxury of being a board member, but you don't get to step differently because of it.
Exactly. Same rules apply. I love that you said that because I knew your group was asking about the parent role and the board role. And it is the same rules should apply, right? You shouldn't even go to Facebook. If you really are upset and you want to do a complaint, you got the policy. And like you were saying, there's steps to follow. Now, in this situation, it could even be, you're saying like, how do they not know? Just go to Sue, especially in a smaller community. Sometimes it could be even a personal agenda.
Okay.
It can be, and I'm saying this because I've seen it. Where this is now an opportunity that board member may see to be like, okay, I don't like the superintendent, so I'm going to do all of this. So I don't know, right? This is just situational, or this is just a scenario. But I like what you said, Michelle, about talking to this individual, especially if it is this individual that knows that there's a policy, knows that this is stuff that should not be happening, but is doing it for their own personal agenda. I should say, talking to the chair, talking to that individual and reminding them and holding them accountable, like these are our policies, this is our board operating agreement, and having that conversation. If that conversation though, and we even have a document on how to do that, like a guidance tool, I'm happy to share it with you all. If let's say sometimes though that individual is like, you meet with them and they're still like, nope, whatever. You know, you can say, I'm going to bring it up to the board. And as a board, you can discuss it. And it can even get even more extreme. But at that point, I would say seek legal counsel. And before you, what we sometimes say, censuring, before you get to that level, seek legal counsel would be my advice. Again, I'm not an attorney, but I'm just giving you situations. And I'm not saying this is happening, but if it's important for me to let you know so that if you ever do, which I hope you never do, run across it, you know how to kind of, what are the steps? What are some guidance? And sometimes usually we get called, hey, and at that point it's like, you don't have your system and that's okay. If I'm really transparent, usually it's once there is a need that then there's the result. So that's what these trainings are for, so that you can set up those systems and know what to do so that you're ready and you have your tools to agree with that. And we have a guidance. It's called meeting disruptions when it's a board member that's disrupting the board. And even sometimes it can be the community disrupting the board. So we have guidance and some guidance on how to do that. And I'll share that document. I'm gonna make a note to myself to share that document.
There's just in connection with that, COSA last year provided a lot of teaching and resources for like disruptive board meetings became a thing, and so they had some resources as well. So.
Yeah, it happens. And so that's why this one's I shouldn't say fun, but it's a scenario that's super layered and it's done purposely because there's a lot happening here. And I love I forgot who mentioned it, that you cannot be emailing other board members and not even individual board members. I would say it's can versus should. I mean, you technically can, like you could have a text with one person. You shouldn't do that though, because it's pretty apparent when there's side conversations happening. When you then go to the board meeting, then you're not being respectful, and all your conversations should be happening in the public eye, in your public meetings. And so that's why you don't want to do like, oh, I'm going to see how this person feels about this agenda item. Oh, I'm going to go to this person before I go to the superintendent, because now you're creating buzz and creating things that should be discussed as a board.
So is it ever appropriate if you are wanting to share information that's just educational, like an article that could inform?
Oh yeah, that's fine.
You can send it to.
Yeah, there are certain scenarios, and I think you have a policy too where you can share, like informational things, or even if you're trying to set up a time for a board meeting, absolutely. Yeah. You can all be on that same email thread. What you want to be careful is to not hit reply all ever,
Right.
because you don't want to catch unintentionally. It can happen where you catch yourself discussing board business and district business, and then that's a public meeting at that point. And so like you can even as a quorum attend a conference. But you just need, again, the same applies. Be careful to not discuss board business when you're in a quorum.
Yeah.
But in terms of this individual going to emailing other board members, maybe they're just doing it one-offs because they're like, oh, I'm not doing it as a quorum, but I'm just going to email this person, and then I'm going to email this person, or I'm going to text and email, so I'm using different avenues. That's still, you're not doing, in my opinion, should versus can, going against kind of your standards of conduct, where you need to have those discussions as a whole. All board members need to hear those concerns if you have concerns. If it's related to board business and district business. Yeah. Is that making sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. We kind of talked about this one, so let's see, maybe we can do this one as a group. A board member shows up to an elementary school teacher's classrooms and says they're there to observe silently student learning in classroom and check on overall staff and student morale. Can a board member do this?
They set it up, right?
Why? What's giving you that that if they set it up? Can you
Oh,
elaborate?
because we don't know if they, well, they just showed up to the elementary school teacher's classroom, right? Like it implies that maybe the teacher didn't know because they had to say they're there to observe silently. You wouldn't have to do that if Sue had told
Yes.
Mrs. Jones that you were going to be there, right?
Exactly. Yep. And we talked about that in your policy. And you have another policy, did I put it in here? BG, where it explains. So if you go to BG, did I put it in here? I might have not. Yeah. I did. Oh yeah, I did. So it's right before the public complaints policy, board staff communications. It's that last paragraph, visits to schools. So if it's an informal expression of interest, and we kind of talked about you're there for a parent-teacher conference, you don't have to let Sue know. But if it's an official visit, which sounds like this is because they're observing the classroom and the staff and teacher morale or student morale, then it needs to be authorized by the board.
Is that in our purview to, to observe staff and student morale?
Good catch. I would say no. I would say no.
Make it a goal.
Catch, Michelle. That's why we brought that up. I would say no. You're absolutely right. It should be maybe to observe a program or a new initiative.
Yeah.
Then maybe yes. But you're right. Observe the teacher. That should be something that Sue and her staff should be in charge of. Thank you.
This happened right before the email, or the Facebook.
I was like, wait, what?
And it was the retaliation from the other thing.
Yeah, yeah, you're
They're all
right.
connected. Yes, they are. Yep. And I'm open to feedback too. If there's something that you're like, this doesn't make sense. Yeah, usually people say they're fun. Okay. So again, you have your BG policy, and it's that last paragraph that kind of talks about that. The other thing too about this policy that's good to know is that the line of communication is that first sentence is always through the superintendent. When the board needs something to the staff, it's through the superintendent, and vice versa. If the board wants to communicate something to staff, Sue does that, right?
Can I just ask a question? Because like we were talking about it, we were talking about just like, oh, if we clear it with Sue, but that wouldn't be an individual board member clearing it with Sue either. It's like here it says it would be under board authorization.
Yes.
So the board would authorize one of its board members to ask to visit. So, okay. I just wanted
Yep.
to.
And usually I think it would be done it's going to be done in a meeting.
Yes.
So Sue should know, and then
Okay, one of us is.
and it doesn't have to be all of you, not the whole board. That might be a little alarming, the whole board, but yeah, like a few of you are going to go observe. Exactly. And maybe don't do a quorum. Good point.
It's not like, hey, Sue, can I go do this? Like, I know it's programming out time next Tuesday.
Yeah.
It's,
It's like the board
Yeah.
said, we talked about it at the board meeting, and then we said, and then you set it up with whatever that program or whatever.
Yeah. Because the board would authorize it, that would have to be a vote, right? And so that would be in the public meeting. You have to do all of that in the public meeting.
Yeah. Okay.
Good catch. Good question. Yes. I love that. Ooh, I kind of already hinted at this one. I might have given it away if you were listening, so let's see. During a public comment, a community member is expressing concerns about the high school junior math teacher. They share a story and examples, then run out of the 3-minute allotted time and ask the board for a couple more seconds to conclude a point. How should the board, or should I say chair, handle this?
We shouldn't be talking about a particular teacher.
Yeah, the junior math.
That in the butt. Yes.
they should not make it 3 minutes.
Yes. Yes. Good
And
catch.
this has happened, and we have done that, or you've done that, you've stepped in and said, oh, that this is, staff is not appropriate. And
Yep.
it's like, oh, done.
Have you ever been asked like why? I'm just curious. Has there ever been pushback like
No,
I
you might
haven't just explained.
Usually
Have you
the
explained
answer
before
is,
the
we
question.
don't talk about, they say, we we can't continue because we cannot do this at the meeting, so they
Yeah,
just
it's
don't.
Yes,
explained.
perfect.
It's explained in
Great.
meetings.
I will say,
Love that.
it's, I think when it's happened, it's been unintentional in some cases where like it starts to sneak. You're
Yes,
talking about
listen.
something else and then it's
Uh-huh.
like
A
a
segue.
reference to
Yeah.
a staff member comes up and I don't like so far, I don't think it's ever been like I just showed up to complain about a teacher kind of
Gotcha.
thing. It's subtle and like listening for it. And sometimes I feel like I'm jumping so fast, you know, but like,
Yeah, you like
I
know
don't
what's
want it.
coming, so you're
Yeah,
like, I gotta stop this, I gotta stop. Yeah.
yeah, or what could potentially come from it.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe once I've even jumped too soon, but it's like, I don't know, that's the piece that scares me.
Yeah.
But it's not just teachers, it's often, it can be, any staff, you know,
Yep.
classified,
Yes.
or it can be a student, it's like, you know,
Oh,
personnel, and these things are very protected.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Yep. And then we talked about even giving the allowing more time, right? We talked about how like if you do that, you got to do it to everyone.
Yeah.
So being careful with that and mindful of that. And then I think I mentioned this earlier, but I know here, especially in smaller communities, even though the name isn't being said, that's identifying the individual.
Yeah.
You know who that is.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I like to mention that too, especially in bigger districts. I call that out a lot too. Okay. And again, you have your policy, which we went through extensively already, and we talked about why you need to listen. You want to keep doing these, or do you want to wrap up?
Wanna do another one?
It's up to you. I'm here till 6, so it's up to you. Or I can wrap up earlier. You let me know. I always like to check in with the board.
I think the more discussion we have, the better.
Okay, let's do it. I love it.
Well, read this one and then we'll see if you like it.
I always like seeing the differences too, and then I'm like, ooh, I need to bring that up next time. So I love this. All right, the board is having a heated debate and discussion at a board meeting. Board members are interrupting each other while speaking, accusing some board members that they are not being respectful and not considering all perspectives with their decision. Board members are being disrespectful to one another and begin to attack each other's character. The chair uses the gavel to get attention and asks board members to please be respectful. All right, what should you do in this situation?
Well, the gavel came out, right? So
Which sometimes doesn't always work.
told everyone to shut up.
Have you
I don't
ever used the gavel?
Not to.
This wasn't during Mizu's tenure.
Yeah.
We actually are a pretty functional board. This is actually very relevant.
It's very relevant. That's what I was
We are
gonna say.
having we are in the throes of some difficulty here. And I think in general, we are handling ourselves well. But it's real life. You know, real life with very, very deep personal perspectives that, and we don't agree.
Mhm.
And so we are in this now. This is happening.
Yeah, that's a very relevant one.
Okay.
We've been borderline.
So how do you think that should be handled?
Well,
Given
in
this-
that case, I mean, I think,
situation,
yeah,
yeah.
the chair uses the gavel and people come to order. This is not, we are not that out of touch with our own emotions. We can't reel ourselves in.
Yeah.
So we do, you know, we have to be asked to maybe, actually, I don't think anyone's been asked to stop talking, but, you know, we do have other business to attend to, and I think that that's the deal, is that you can only focus on the, you know, the splinter in your finger, which turns into a blister for so long, and then we have to find our way out, which is what we're in the process of doing as a board. And, you know, it's public school, I've said this numerous times, not everyone's not gonna get everything they want.
Yeah.
You know, we'll find our way through and keep the kids at the front of our minds, and we're doing it.
Thank you. I appreciate you bringing that up, and because that is important, that to have this conversation and utilizing it right now as a resource as I'm here as your third party to talk about some best practices. Anything else to add to what Michelle just shared?
I mean, we can refer ourselves to our own policies about, board conduct and stuff like that. So, review those. Talk about once if that gets to that point, ask, sort of just have a discussion about are we conducting this according to our policies?
I think one of the big things that we've all learned, because we're all parents of students here or have been, and when you're a board member, you are the kids. It's not my kid.
Yes.
It's the kids. So we have to always reel that back in that we got elected to serve this district.
Yeah. And it can be hard. I'll be the first to say it. Like, if you're a parent and removing your hat, this isn't the only time I've heard this. I've heard this many times, and I've been working with OSBA for almost 4 years. And so it is hard. And I think that's, acknowledging that too is important, and having these when you have these work sessions, having that space to have a conversation. And again, it comes down to having those clear expectations on how even you're going to run your meetings. So when it comes to this, and then I know you also have a policy, did I put it in here? I might have. Around how your board meetings are ran, and that's, you follow, I believe, Robert's rule. And there's even some little, we have cheat sheets on how to even simply, sometimes, instead of gaveling down, and if it's not going anywhere, a recess.
Yeah.
Have
That's what I'm saying. A break is
Have
good.
a recess, and sometimes if it gets even to the extreme, not to say that it's getting to that level, right? But in other instances, and I've heard this happen, if it does get to that level, you can postpone, this isn't the right time, let's just reschedule the meeting. Or let's say it's 9:30 p.m. and it's not getting anywhere. You can say hey, I think we need to just hold a special meeting to continue the business, right? There are ways to go about that. And yes, reminding about this. And I also will say, remember that, and this is part of what's difficult, but I'm not trying to say you shouldn't have tough conversations, and you absolutely should. And you should bring up those questions. And I have been told in the past, it's hard because it's open to the public, they're recorded. It is hard, but it is important for you to have that. But there's a way to do that in a respectful manner. There's a way to bring up your perspectives, and maybe if have you thought of this or that, in a respectful manner. And we always say, you're a leader, and part of being that effective leadership is modeling the way for your students. If you're misbehaving, or you're having heated debates and discussions, if there was a student there, would that be okay to model, right? So that's another way too to kind of remember. And we even tell the community too for our little meeting disruption. Remember I talked about that guidance tool. We have it when it comes to meeting disruptions of board members, but also to the community. And we say we're modeling the way for our students. So please remember, be respectful. And I even saw a district recently have a student talk about the importance of conduct. So, kind of bring it back to that and remember your role and how, you are in that role leadership position, right? Okay, anything else in this one that I wanted to talk about? We talked about recess. There's ways, again, you can postpone it as well if needed, if it's super extreme. And then, yes, holding each other accountable to your policies and your board operating agreements, which is that communication protocol that I showed you earlier. So that's what that's for. It's not to list everything. That's why I recommend it be no more than a page. When I do it with boards, I create a one-pager for them, because you want it to be something that's easily accessible and that you can almost at one point start to memorize, right? Then you don't even need the tool.
We have a version, it's not one page. Although you have columns, so maybe we can.
Yes, we do have columns. Yes.
Maybe we can turn it into a page, but we do have.
You do, yes, that is right.
Bringing it back and reviewing.
My favorite.
When was the last time you revisited?
So that's what I was just trying to, was that the end of last school year? So Abby, we probably haven't revisited it this year.
Thank you.
Have you ever seen it? Okay, so I think it was mid last year. Mary Ellen. Yeah.
Yeah, I was here.
Yeah, so that's a good reminder.
Oh, Mary Ellen. Yeah, Mary Ellen. Yeah, so it's in that transition.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe revisit it. Maybe, I'm happy to look at it too and give you some points. Or you can even do a virtual where I can come in virtually, whatever, you want, or I can even just give you some guidance. But yeah, I always recommend it to be one page. Once it becomes more than that, it's just, yeah, there's a lot. And again, a lot of it's already in policy. It's more so picking out and prioritizing what's needed right now for your board. So this is my guidance for an operating agreement. Review the agreement at least every other year, or as needed. Discuss it as a team together, the board and the superintendent. Check existing policies. Ask yourself, is this already in a policy, or do we need to elaborate on it or just define it more? For example, if you're having marathon meetings, assess if policy suffices. Maybe it doesn't, right? Which is what I just said right now. And then determine what approach is best for addressing the issue or the concern. Or sometimes I say it's not even that there's an issue, it's just you want to be proactive and don't want it to get to that level. So that's also a good way. Use it as a proactive tool as well. But usually I come in when it's already an issue. So I always tell boards during these trainings, I say, set up your system before you need it. But you can still always call us. Okay, so I'm going to wrap us up now with just talking about some additional tools and resources. I mentioned some, and I'm happy to send any additional tools that I mentioned. I jotted one down, which is the disruptions of meeting guidance tool that we created. But take a look at our website. It recently got a lift where we revamped it. And so take a look at our website. As I mentioned, you have your own OSBA login. That's at the very top right corner over there. And if you cannot access it, let me know and I'll send it to somebody in our information to help you get your login. There's all our departments listed. I mentioned a few of the other departments. I'm not the only department. I'm board development. So I help a lot with board professional development and trainings. But we have our legislative team, communications, policy department, and others. And then you can look at our upcoming events and trainings. There's a bunch of great information. Some of our things, so this is access to our services, which is exclusive to our OSBA members. So I just mentioned some of those teams. There's the others. I forgot legal services, which is a big one. And then we have also, I mentioned the Legislative Policy Committee, right, and the legislative priorities when it comes to advocacy for roles of the board. We also have an Oregon Rural School Board Members of Caucus. It used to be a committee and now it's a caucus. We also have our color of caucus, and then right now it's a committee. Hopefully it'll become a caucus as well. Our Oregon LGBTQIA2S School Board Member Advisory Committee.
What's the status of the rural caucus?
So they're going to be giving an update at the summer board conference.
Okay.
Yep, they'll be doing a hot topic table, I believe, and maybe even at annual convention. Yep.
Do you know what?
And they have their meetings at the summer board.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
What are our dues? Do you know what we pay?
I
You probably
don't, but I can get you that information. Or do you know?
No.
I don't know it off the top of my head.
Yeah, because there's the legislative grant and there's the advertising one, it might be
The pace, yeah.
the policy one.
Yeah.
But I thought there's just like the dues.
Yeah, as a membership, you have dues,
Then-
correct.
Then if we want,
This is it, like services.
this is extra.
I see
But
what
what
you're
we
saying.
get, I want to know how much we pay in dues and what do we get for that? Because we get the opportunity to pay you to come here.
Yeah, absolutely. And so as you get access, I believe it's to PACE and our legal, which is also their insurance policy. That's the big one, I would say, as a member that you get. Is that's probably the biggest is our PACE insurance policy, the property and casualty coverage of education. There's only, I think, a few districts that are under it. I can't remember which ones they are. But then, yes, you get access to all of our resources, all of our webinars, which are behind the portal. So that's part of it as well. But I don't know the number off the top of my head. Our communications team, I know you get bombarded with a lot of emails, and they're working on how to maybe get the information, space it out a little bit, I think, or just highlight certain things a little bit better, because you get like the news clips, which is like state and national, which is nice to see, especially different sizes of school districts and see the similarities, or you can hear like what initiatives other schools your size are working on. But there's that, but then there's also our news, which highlights stories, and then that's where sometimes you hear about our events.
Just
as well.
on that, like, so I like that actually. I look
The news clips,
yeah, I look at a lot of those
Yeah.
articles, or I try to.
I do too.
Yeah, but a lot of them are, subscription, like you have to have a subscription to those in order to look at them.
I'll talk to my communications.
And so, I mean, I know that that's probably a non-starter, but like having a little summary of them. if
Oh, do
you're-
they not do that?
No.
Usually they'll do a story, I thought. Well, if it's
No,
a
no.
big.
Yeah, no.
You usually have to click into
You have to
it,
click
right?
into the
And
actual article.
then-
And so if it's a subscription service, and they're
You're not gonna subscribe to.
you're just trying to
Yeah.
Yeah.
Provide maybe a summary or tagline of what it is. I see what you're saying.
So that, because for those of us who don't have subscriptions to.
Absolutely.
Something.
That's a good point. And I'll let my
Then if you wanted to
communications team know.
investigate more, you'd know enough to like
Yes.
hunt it down.
Yeah.
Without even.
So even just like the title or something, yeah.
Well, and they kind of can get, there's usually the title.
Oh, yeah.
I think the title of the article
Or like
is
a
the link.
paragraph or so.
But yeah, like a couple sentences.
Yeah, you're
about-
right.
Bullet.
It's always a link.
And I know that's more work for people, so maybe I'm not asking them to do that necessarily, but just it's a problem for me, because I'm like, oh, that sounds like it's relevant to me, but I can't get to it because it costs money that I don't want to pay.
Even
I'll
if it
bring that
was
up to our communications team.
For the ones that are open access, you don't have to.
No, yeah,
But anyone
Right.
that was for.
Yeah, the Oregonian,
Subscription.
usually you need a subscription, New York Times.
Yeah, that's true.
Almost
all the
everything.
Yeah.
paper.
Yeah, because it's not just local, it's national.
Well, you used
Yeah.
to be able to use an incognito window on all those and still see them, and they're even blocking those now, so.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to even open the full window to see everything. Yeah, yeah, they're aware of some stuff that I love. This is a great opportunity too, because I tell them I'm out in the field, so I hear things, and I'm not in that department, but I'm happy to share.
Yeah.
I do know who's in that department. Lastly, what I will say, aside from being a board trainer, my team puts on these particular events. And what I mean by that is we plan the program. And me in particular, I'm the lead for that. I'm the program planner. So who's how many workshops, our keynote speakers. And so I'm involved in a lot of that. And I know what's to be expected at our summer board conference, which is going to highlight a lot of our accreditation program, our summer leadership institute, or our board leadership institute. If you haven't heard about that, it's an accreditation program that has certain courses to get certain levels. So we have a bronze, silver, and gold. And so we're going to be highlighting all the silver courses at summer board. And we'll sprinkle in some bronze and gold as well. But usually it's very heavily OSBA led. It's bringing in board members to talk about like certain standards. So you heard all the standards that I mentioned. We're going to have actually board members be talking about their direction, how they set the direction for their district. So it's not just us, but you're actually hearing it and being it, how it's being applied and put into practice with boards. And then our annual convention, so it's more of that summer board conference is more an opportunity to do like board professional development training. The annual convention is more like sharing best practices from across the state. There'll be some OSBA trainings as well, but it's more so a great networking opportunity and to hear different initiatives and programs that's happening around K through 12 educational issues and whatnot. And that's in Portland downtown, and that's November 7th through 9th. So we have the dates. Registration is not open for that, but we are opening registration. We have open registration for summer board.
The student one or the student showcase that you mentioned is in
It is annual convention. Yep. Yeah, because students are off in the summer. So, but yeah, that one's more heavily for board members, but at all levels, any board member can attend. And then this is me and the team, our director of board development, Chris Miles, and then we have Vince, who I mentioned as the board leadership cafe, and was a board member. Kristen's a board member actually right now. And then Jen Nelson is our senior board development administrative assistant, and she hosts a cafe for board administrative professionals, and does a lot of that work with them. She used to be an administrative professional, so she has a lot of experience and expertise. And with that, any additional questions or comments?
Really good at your job.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Our appreciations for each other or for me. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
I mean, that can be a tedious presentation, and you didn't make it, you made it engaging, and so kudos.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
I like the scenarios.
Yeah, usually we hear that. The scenarios are fun. Yep. And as a team, we've been talking about how to improve, and stuff. So, yeah, trainings used to be more presentational.
I mean, it's a bit of a challenge because you're talking to someone who's been on the board for close
Yeah.
to 40 years and someone who just got on. So you have to, I mean, it's not possible to make it specific to each of our needs,
Right.
but that was a really good overview. It's just a really good overview, and a lot of it I've forgotten.
Yeah, we always say do the training at least once a year is good to do it, especially if you have new board members. There's really no right or wrong time to do it. It's based on your needs. So I always, when a board asks me like, what should we do? I'm like, well, what's happening? I need to talk to the board chair who sets the agenda with the superintendent to get an idea of what trainings are needed for you. Yeah.
And as far as the offerings for the fall conference, that closes at the end of this month.
Yeah. Yep. June 30th. We might extend it. We usually do. We're aware that it's the end of the school year. We're wrapping up. It's been open for a bit though. But again, we're noticing that maybe there's not the marketing emails maybe, or something is missing. So, because it's actually been open since May. Yeah, May, June. Yeah, it's been open for a bit, or sorry, like the end of April. I can't remember. But we might extend it. But as of now, the deadline is June 30th. So yeah, share it out if you have any ideas of students who can showcase, or if you have any proposals you want to share as a best practice for other boards. Feel free to submit a workshop. There is going to be less workshops. I will say that. I know that because I'm the program planner. And that's because we want to repeat them. Because we've heard that a lot of board members are like, oh man, it's hard to choose which one. So can you repeat it in the morning and the afternoon? So that's why we're going to try to maybe minimize the number, because we're going to repeat. Not that we're limiting how many we're accepting. Well, we are, because we're going to be repeating them.
And what's the theme?
All in for students. Yeah. That's
a wide open
It is.
subject.
It is. And we have a really great keynote speaker who has spoken before, but he has a new topic around that. Yep. And talking about when there's different perspectives and centering it back on students. Yeah. All right, y'all. It's on the dot 6 p.m. And so I always like to tell boards I like to end on time. And so thank you so much for your time. It was wonderful being here. I enjoyed seeing the Hall of Fame over there for the high schoolers. And again, thank you for all the work you do. You do a lot. And I recognize that you're a volunteer position, but you're an elected official. And yeah, just remember that the work you do matters. And you are making an impact. Thank you. Yeah. And if you want the slide, let me know.
Yes. Yeah.
You do? Okay.
And then Janet, I think you shared it to me, but if you send it again, it'd be easier for me not.
Send what?
Email, but you have other trainings beyond enrollment.
Oh, yes.
Will you just send me that list?
Yeah. Did I send you the pamphlet or not?
You might have.
I can resend it.
But
I can
yeah,
resend it
just
as well.
sending this, can you send that with it?
Yes, of
Okay.
course. Yes, no problem.
And I did send you all the link on the website that has.
Yay!